All right, I think we have quorum, so we can start. All right, Kavika, can you hear us okay?
Yes, apologies for being tardy.
No problem. Thank you all for being. I know everyone has busy schedules, so really appreciate it. Again, I just mentioned a little bit earlier that we have until noon today to go through the review of this Tier 6 plan. So I think that should give us sufficient time to do that. So we'll go ahead and start now since we have everyone here. And again, thank you everyone else that's here to be here at the meeting with us from Auwahi and contractors, consultants. Thank you. So let's go ahead. Today is Thursday, February 26th, 2026. The time is 9:09 in the morning AM, and the Endangered Species Recovery Committee public meeting is called to order. My name is Jason Omick, Wildlife Program Manager with the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife. I will be today's ESRC public meeting chair. Before we get started, just a few notes. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube. Please do not use the Zoom chat feature as this is not visible to everyone in attendance. If you'd like to provide verbal testimony, you may do so via Zoom. If you'd like to provide written comments, please email to the following email address, which is DOFAW, DOFAW .hcp@hawaii.gov. Our meeting minutes and materials are viewable online on our ESRC website under meeting archives. With me in the conference room, I have DOFAW HCP staff here, and we'll go ahead and introduce everyone, starting with Kelly.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Kelly Yamaguchi, DOFAW HCP staff.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Kinsley McEacher, and I'm a DOFAW HCP associate.
Aloha Kakahiaka, Jesse Adams, Aloha, DOFAW HCP associate.
Thank you, staff. Also today we have our Deputy AG. If you can introduce yourself, Danica. Thank you again for being here today.
Good morning, everyone. Deputy Attorney General Danica Patel. I'm here to advise the ESRC on sunshine law compliance, as well as any legal issues that they may want to go into executive session about.
Awesome. Thank you again, Danica. From here, we'll move on to the committee members. We can start with Melissa. If you guys can introduce yourselves, please.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Price. I'm sitting in the UH seat, and I do not have anyone present in the room with me today.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and if everyone can just keep your cameras on and just let us know if there's anybody in the room with you, please.
Good morning, Karen Corto representing USGS, and there's no one in the room with me.
Yeah. One more ESRC member, Kavika.
Aloha, Kavika. Sorry, I'm on my phone. I'm going to log in from my laptop in my office right now, so I'll transition, but I am Kavika Winter, ESRC member. No one's in the room with me. Thank you.
Great. Before I go over the order of business today, I just wanted to provide a short announcement. Next week, March 5th, March 5th and 6th, we'll be holding ESRC annual review meetings. On March 5th, it'll be Wind HCP annual review for 2025. And March 6th will be non-wind and safe harbor agreement projects for 2025. So we'll be doing the annual review for the FY25 projects. With that said, please mark your calendars, and materials and everything will be ready for the committee. Either they're up already and additional documents will be loaded over the next few days. So order of business today, we have 3 items on the agenda. Item 2 today will be the review of the Hawaiian Hoary Bat Tier 6 Auwahi Site-Specific Mitigation Implementation Plan. First, we'll provide a brief presentation with DOFAW comments regarding the plan. A second, Julia Ho from Invenergy, representing the licensee, Auwahi Wind Farm, will present regarding their mitigation plan. Following the licensee presentation, we'll open the floor for the public and ESRC discussion and comments. And finally, item 3 is adjournment. So that's pretty much what we got today. The main topic is the BAT Tier 6 project. So moving on to item 2, and that will be a short presentation from staff, and we'll go ahead and start that now.
Everyone see the screen? Okay, great. Aloha, everyone. My name is Kinsley McEachern, DOFA HCP, and I'll be presenting DOFA HCP comments regarding the Auwahi Wind Farm Tier 6 Hawaiian Hoary Bat Mitigation Plan. So regarding the take request for this tier's mitigation plan and site specifics, this is related to Tier 6. Tier 6 is 115 to 140 bats, so take request of 25 bats from Auwahi. This was added in the 2019 HCP amendment. Regarding the mitigation site description, it's proposed at 511 acres, and this is within a greater parcel owned by Ulapalakua Ranch, which is a private landowner on the island of Maui. It's located about 6.3 miles southwest of Kamehamehanui Forest Reserve. It's also located in the proximity of Kula Forest Reserve and located adjacent to the current Tier 4 and Tier 1 Auwahi mitigation areas at Ulapalakua Ranch. It consists of pasture land and ephemeral streams, and the elevation range is the lower elevation from 600 to 1,000 meters. The land within the mitigation area is owned by Ulapalakua Ranch, and they do have an agricultural conservation easement with Maui Coastal Land Trust. And this limits particular uses, including development in various ways, and encourages different agricultural and conservation initiatives. Auwahi will also develop an additional agreement with Ulapalakua Ranch that memorializes restrictions and responsibilities under this site-specific mitigation plan to ensure protection of lands for conservation purposes, and to also guarantee no other activities that could reduce the conservation benefits for the bats would occur. I do have a copy of the agricultural conservation easement that Auwahi provided. It was not shared publicly due to confidentiality purposes, but if requested, we can have it released through the Bureau of Conveyances. So essentially, this is located within a continuous corridor of mitigation and conservation areas that I listed before, specifically Kula Forest Reserve, the newer Kamehamehanui Forest Reserve, and Tier 1 and 4, and as well as 5. Oh, excuse me, yeah. 5 is located a little bit farther away, but 1 and 4 are on Ulapalakua Ranch. So this is just a diagram of kind of the surrounding landscape. I realized that it's a little blurry, but you can kind of see all the different conservation areas. Kamehamehanui Forest Reserve in the orange, and then there's Kula Forest Reserve covering the green areas with dots, and then Haleakala Ranch to the north. It did get cut off, but south of the Kula Forest Reserve is the Ulapalakua Ranch property.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify, what are we looking at here? Like, what's the... It is blurry. I'm just trying to understand what I'm looking at.
We can move on. This one was just to provide context of the greater landscape on Maui. And so to the right, the diagram indicates in the orange Kamehamehanui Forest Reserve. And then below that to the south is the Kula Forest Reserve. And then Ulapalakua Ranch was on this diagram, but I realized it got cut off, and that's south of Kula Forest Reserve. So I was just
so the
trying
place
to
where
show.
mitigation is happening is not shown to us right now.
Unfortunately,
Okay,
yes.
sorry, that's what I was looking
Okay.
for. I'm just trying to understand. You're welcome to move on. I'll
Okay.
await further maps.
Okay, no problem. So this is specifically the Ula Palakua area and specifically the Wahi Pu'u'io mitigation project. So to the right is the key and outlined in yellow is the mitigation areas. So there's two separate sections here on the map. The green or teal color is the proposed outplanting areas. The lighter orange is the civil pastoral areas. And there's water feature indicated on this map as well as an existing fence line in the red. There is a proposed new fence in the dotted blue. And then to the right of the diagram of the map is the Tier 4 mitigation area with Tier 4 outplanting areas as well. And there's also a stream on this map. Yeah, I guess those are probably the most relevant from the legend. But just to give you an idea of the different parcels, the top parcel is approximately 102 acres, I believe, and then the lower parcel for mitigation is around 400 and something, I'm missing the exact number, acres as well. And I'm doing kind of a brief overview, but Julia, representing Auwahi today from Invenergy, will be presenting more in detail. So the minimization, mitigation, and adaptive management for this plan include the removal of 17,000 linear feet of barbed wire fencing from the site to reduce the risk to bats on this mitigation site as requested by ESRC and the agencies as well. The mitigation specifics include 19,000 linear feet of ungulate fencing installed and maintained around native outplantings, as well as ungulate removal in these outplanting areas. As I specified in that map, approximately 102 acres, the top portion, as well as areas within the lower portion will be considered native forest corridor outplantings. And these will be achieved within 2 years with the eventual goal of having 20% of the 511 acres having completely native forest outplantings coverage. The lower portion that I indicated in the map is approximately 409 acres, and that's silvopastoral mostly, and has occasional forest corridor outplantings interspersed. And these silvopastoral type outplantings will be utilizing trees that are known to be attractive roost species for bats. Moreover, the mitigation will involve installation of a pond as a water source feature for the species, as well as invasive vegetation control to decrease competition for native outplantings. And then finally, the adaptive management will involve potentially an installation of a second water feature if needed, and other conditions that specify additional outplantings that would be made in agreement with the agencies.
Really briefly, before you move on from this slide, when it says ungulate fencing, is that pig or access deer?
I believe it would be.
For the outplanting site at the top, which is the 102 acres, they're going to remove all animals from that unit.
And the fences are of a
Yeah,
sufficient height to
ungulate
exclude
fences,
deer.
which would keep out a pig too.
Oh, right, but they're aimed at they're high enough for deer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. And if, yeah, I have some specifics about the silvopastoral plantings as well as the native species plantings. I just kind of wanted to do more of an overview and then get to the DOFA comments, but feel free to ask those questions as well. But I guess I'll just give a little more specifics. So the faster growing native or indigenous trees such as koa, nene leao, and ohe, mauka would be planted, in addition to ohia, llama, and willy willy. Additional native canopy and mid-story species like iliahe would also be planted. And they would also, in the silvo pastoral area, it might be non-native species, but these are species that have been developed in consultation with USGS bat biologists to include ulu, lychee, mango trees, which are known maternity roosts for Hawaiian hoary bat. So in terms of the mitigation monitoring and success criteria, there's a diversity of metrics that Auwahi will be using to measure success for this plan. This includes acoustic monitoring, and they were going to be beginning this approximately 3 months after management actions have started and continue through a baseline monitoring period every other year for the remaining permit term. And this is essentially looking at the increases in bat activity in the mitigation area. It will include 6 monitoring locations and will provide a ratio of 1 or more detectors for every 85 acres. And this is at a density that's 3 to 7 times greater than similar studies. And Auwahi will be looking for statistically significant increase from baseline over time in the rate of nightly bat acoustic detections, including excuse me, I don't have that word, or feeding buzzes. So the number of bat calls or feeding buzzes over the total active detector nights. And they will particularly focus on the maternity reproductive season as well. They will also be looking at a statistically significant decrease in the time interval between sunset and first acoustic detection or peak in acoustic activity by the end of year 5. So they have these various metrics that they're looking at, and they will be looking for by the end of year 5 to justify statistically significant increases from the baseline. If it can be demonstrated through these acoustic monitoring that there is an increased concentration of bat activity in the mitigation area, it can be deduced that the site is at least providing foraging habitat and could potentially support bat roosting and even maternity roosts. They also are going to couple this with confirmation of roost use using acoustic monitoring to document the roosts, and then additional technology to confirm these roosts. And this would be defined as a roost would be defined of at least 1 individual documented roosting in vegetation during the day at any point during the period of implementation. And moreover, they will also be looking at percent forest cover, and they will utilize GIS analysis through aerial imaging to document this. They will be looking for a total 20 to 25% of native outplanting achieved by the end of the management time. Also on here, they will be doing bat prey monitoring. They will be looking at arthropods. They will be using malaise traps and be sampling overall biomass of insects. So in terms of DOFA's analysis of this mitigation plan, DOFA found that there's various supportive features of this plan. Firstly, it's interconnected to other mitigation sites that Auwahi manages on the private land parcel, as well as larger state conservation parcels. Furthermore, this mitigation is occurring in prime bat reproductive habitat. This has been demonstrated through various studies, including the Auwahi study by USGS that was posted on our website. In the study, there was 2 female bats confirmed to be pregnant, and this confirmed presence of reproductive females in the vicinity of the Auwahi mitigation area, which is located adjacent to the site. Furthermore, there was an H.T. Harvey study in 2019 that documented the use of bats using this particular Auwahi area, as well as habitat features that overlap at Ulapalakua. This included gulches, grassland, and low-density developed habitats. Based on the acoustic and telemetry data from this research, bats also spent significantly more time in grasslands and also a low-density developed forest woodland, low elevation areas as well. These are indicative of areas that are found in this proposed Tier 6 ranch area. And furthermore, DOFA really likes that this plan involves 10 years of management at a site that is under a conservation agricultural land easement. So it's protected in perpetuity beyond the 10 years of mitigation that will be occurring. And finally, DOFA likes that Auwahi consulted USGS in these various acoustic metrics that will be utilized to determine the net benefit to the species. And this is going to be coupled with the documentation of bat roofs in the success criteria that is outlined in this plan. So there was some concerns that DOFA had initially, and I'm going to go over them and explain how they were addressed with our work in consultation with Auwahi. Initially, DOFA had a concern that the acreage was a lower amount of acres because it's at the lower end of what's recommended. In the bat guidance document, it's recommended 20 to 40 acres per bat to mitigate at. So obviously this is at that lower end. But once we consulted further with Auwahi, we found these various studies that indicate that this is a high quality bat habitat. And it is in a lower elevation that the ESRC and agencies have also indicated they want to see mitigation occur. Furthermore, the Auwahi HCP amendment actually indicates that Auwahi will perform only 508 acres of mitigation for Tier 6. And yes, so this is indicated in the amendment itself. So the 511 acres actually exceeds the requested amount of acres. And then in addition, with these enhanced levels of metrics for monitoring the different bat activity, oh, that's a typo there, but you can ignore the survival and recruitment rate. That's something that we wanted them to address. But these enhanced levels of monitoring will also indicate bat usage in this area and hopefully give a good idea of the bats utilizing this area for both foraging and reproduction. So right now, there's concern about why possibly Auwahi is not doing capture studies. Capture studies, by getting these bats in hand, ultimately have too few of data points from those research that would be performed. And this would not enable Auwahi to draw firm conclusions over time to compare from baseline to the various years of restoration actions. So by coupling the acoustic monitoring for the roofs along with the documentation using either thermal imaging or other innovative technology, Auwahi feels that this would be more indicative of documenting reproduction. Unfortunately, when you're documenting reproduction, you're not necessarily going to get the demographic data behind it. But fortunately, there was a Waiho study that did demonstrate that there have been pregnant females in this area. Another concern was that this site mitigation proposed area was broken into two separate parcels. But the mitigation parcels are both adjacent to Tier 4 and interconnected to this broader conservation area. And there is native outplanting happening in both areas. And talking to Auwahi, they feel that this parcel would be easily traversed by bats, especially with the Tier 4 mitigation site to the right, and to the left upper area, there is another forested area and many different native outplanting areas intermixed with the silvopastoral roost potential areas. So for additional feedback that DOFA has at this time is looking at the adaptive management actions, we would like to see Auwahi clarify specifically the trigger when referring to the outplanting goals of forest coverage. I think that in section 7-3, it states that if it doesn't reach 20% of forest coverage by year 10, they will increase outplanting. Or if it doesn't look like it will reach the 20%, by year 5, they will start to implement adaptive management. But in section 8, it indicates if it does not reach at least 15% in year 5 above the baseline, Auwahi would then complete supplemental plantings. So we just wanted those sections clarified to specifically lend to what the trigger and what the action is. And then moreover, we wanted to clarify the timeline for these outplanting goals. Specifically, it seems to mention that by year 10, we want to see the 20% forest coverage, but we just want Auwahi to clarify that. And then we also would like Auwahi to clarify how they will come up with the numbers for supplemental plantings if adaptive management is triggered. And this can be determined by looking at recruitment and survival. And that was what was on the last slide. So we want to have them look at specific metrics so that they can basically have a better trajectory and numbers for the supplemental plantings. And I think that is it right now, but essentially we want to kind of have more measurable goals related to the adaptive management. And I think that is kind of our outstanding feedback going into this meeting today. But I can answer any questions from the ESRC now or go back to any slides.
Just a question for the committee. Would it be easiest to get the presentation from Auwahi first and then just kind of efficiently go through so we don't get told, oh, that's going to be presented in the next presentation, and that way we'd kind of have all the information? What do you think? Or do you have questions you want to ask right now?
Thank you, Melissa. Nope, I was just going to say that. Let's hear from the consultant and the applicant now, and you're going to have a little bit more in-depth information from them. And I think they're going to answer a few questions or provide a little bit more clarity on some of the questions that we may have. Some of the language in the document in my mind looks great, actually. I only had a few questions with it, but there are some things that we would like clarity on the language and some of the mitigation stuff and the adaptive management stuff, and maybe they'll hit on that. So we'll go ahead and just move forward to the applicant and their consultant to present for us now. Julia, thank you again for being here today. Really appreciate it. And the mic is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Jason, and thank you for that presentation, Kinsley. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here and helping contribute and produce the best kind of plan that we can put forward moving forward with this mitigation for Tier 6. So I'm Julia Ho. I work with Invenergy on our environmental compliance and strategy team. Also here with me today is Jason Collins on our ECS team, George Akau, who is our site biologist and has been working out at Auwahi for many, many years now. And then we have a couple of folks from Tetra Tech, our consulting team, Troy Romig and Alicia Uller, who will help answer any questions as needed. So I'll jump into our presentation right away. And I think I need to be allowed to share my screen.
I just made you co-host, Julia, so see if that works.
Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Excellent. So our team at Auwahi over the past 9 months has been developing this plan, and we received feedback from DOFAW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and USGS Bat Research Team in the process. We have incorporated those and are now bringing this plan with that feedback incorporated to the full ESRC for any additional input and suggestions as we proceed to finalizing this plan with the agencies. In developing the Tier 6 site-specific mitigation plan in coordination with DOFAW and US Fish, Auwahi referenced the site documents, including the ITP, ITL, HCP, and the amended HCP. So this is a list of items that are expectations established in those site documents and then incorporated in the plan. So the goal of the plan is land restoration and management to enhance bat foraging and roosting habitat and provide an overall benefit to the species. It's very similar to the criteria used for our Tier 4 and Tier 5 mitigation. The mitigation for Tier 5 is for 25 bats, as Kinsley presented in her talk, and it's targeted to improve 508 acres. The acoustic monitoring at a minimum of 6 locations and insect monitoring with malaise traps was also called out in the HCP, and Auwahi will submit its proposed SSMIP within 5 months of triggering this tier. Tier 6 mitigation planning was to begin with a take estimate greater than 106 bats, and we enter Tier 6 at the take estimate of greater than 115 bats. Funding assurances for a specified amount were to be paid within 90 days of triggering the planning phase. And then DOFA and US Fish were to review, revise as needed, and approve the mitigation plan within 3 months of receiving a final plan from Auwahi Wind. So as I mentioned, we've been working through this, and this is the work plan and the timeline of work that we have completed in coordination with DOFA and US Fish, and sort of where we are in the process of bringing this plan together. So the red dots indicate checkpoints that are called out in the HCP and ITP. Tier 6 planning was triggered in June 9th of 2025 when take estimate exceeded 106 bats at Auwahi. Funding assurances were provided within 90 days and finalized on September 5th with approval from DOFA. Due to our early agency coordination to evaluate options and engagement with the landowners, developing a concept plan to discuss with agencies prior to completing a first draft even, we were able to provide a first draft on August 15th. So this is prior to the HCP Tier 6 deadline called out. We met with DOFA and US Fish in August to discuss the concept plan and highlights of the draft. Over the next month, agencies reviewed the plan, and we met again in September to discuss their feedback. We then incorporated that feedback and drafted up a second version of the plan and met again in sort of late November to discuss additional feedback from DOFA and US Fish. We were able to also meet with some of the bat research team with USGS in early January to receive feedback on that second draft version of the SSMIP. We've incorporated that as well as feedback from DOFA in a early January meeting into this, what we're calling a draft final SSMIP. And that is what we are bringing forward here today for the ESRC to provide feedback on as well. We aim to incorporate additional feedback received today and finalize the Tier 6 plan with agency approval over the next month to begin implementing the Tier 6 plan prior to entering our Tier 6 incidental take levels.
Thank you, Julia. I just want to interrupt really quick, and I apologize. This is a great work plan to kind of see. I just wanted to make sure that the ESRC members understand that this plan just basically requires agency approval. We're bringing this to the ESRC because you guys have asked that you want to see these implementation plans. And so we're here today to kind of seek comments from you guys on this plan so we can continue to work with the applicant to approve this site SSMIP implementation plan. Sorry. Thank you, Julia.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. All right. So now I'll walk through sort of outline of the plan and items that we've included in the plan, figures we've included in the plan in a bit more detail. This is figure 1 from the plan. It shows the location information sort of across Maui with the connectedness that Kinsley spoke to of the Kula Forest Reserve, which is in purple on this map, the Haleakala National Park, which is in that sort of teal light color, Kamehamehanui Forest Reserve, which is where our Tier 5 mitigation is occurring. So Kamehamehanui is in green, and our Tier 5 portion of mitigation is in orange. And then connecting over to the mitigations, our Tier 1 and Tier 4 mitigation portions that already occurred and are already currently being implemented in Ulupalakua Ranch land, and how this Tier 6 section will connect down into lower elevation from those previously implemented ongoing tiers of mitigation.
Sorry, Julie, can I just ask, what about tier 2 and 3? Did you already
Tier
cover?
2 and 3 were funding of research projects.
Okay.
And that is actually, I'm going to dive into some of
Okay.
the Waiho mitigation project is one of the research projects that were funded. And so we are using some of the research that was done and some of the results from that to help inform this mitigation as well.
Thank you.
Yep. So this is figure 2 from the plan, and this is just to highlight that we have awareness of bat activity across the island surrounding this mitigation location. And so there is reason to expect bats to be in this area. Some of the additional pieces of science that we used to inform this mitigation. So this is the Montoya et al. From the Montoya et al. Study from Hawaii Island. Found that tree stands used for reproduction ranged in elevation from 12.7 to 1,007 meters, with roosts indicated in the red yes here being those that we had visual confirmation of the perch in the tree and at least one pup present. With feedback from DOFAW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we incorporated these results in our site selection prioritization. So we were able to prioritize a mitigation option with most of the elevation below that 1,000 meter or 330 foot elevation gradient. This ensures that the bat mitigation actions will be implemented at elevations where we have already documented maternity roosting on other islands for the species.
Julia, can you go into more depth on the 2 different colors? I'm not quite understanding.
Yes, so these are the stands, the roost stands, and some of these are pretty challenging to get into and to get eyes on the bat in the tree. And so the red, those yeses, are locations where we actually had eyes on a bat in a tree with a pup at that roost. As part of this.
Did you know it was a
USGS
roost
study.
without a visual confirmation?
From tracking bats to these
Tracking.
trees. Yeah, so this was the USGS study that was done on Hawaii Island. So all of these bats were tracked over that time period, and telemetry allowed us to find these sites and narrow in on these locations. It's just challenging to see the bats in some of the pretty tall eucalyptus trees that they roost in, or in clusters of a couple of trees. It can be challenging to determine.
Okay, so the point of you showing us this research from Hawaii Island is to show us that this is a viable elevation. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Okay, and then, sorry, can you clarify what the elevation is of the site?
The site ranges from 600 to, sorry, I have a later slide on that, but from 600 to 1,000 meter elevation.
Okay, so we're looking at the last 2 bars. Okay.
And so these are these are stands that were from bats, either juveniles or adult female bats that were classified as pregnant or lactating. So the adult females were pregnant or lactating, and then juveniles. So this does not include all of the stands that were documented in this study. It's just focusing on those ones that were likely maternity roosts.
Okay. Do you know how that was determined with no visual?
From capturing the bats and then putting the transmitters on them.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Just something I'll flag to come back later is that these trees were so mature, it was difficult to document where they were. And this plan is proposing outplanting trees that won't reach that level of maturity for a really long time. So just want to stick a pin in that, but don't want to hold you up for moving on.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. And we can come back to that for sure. All right. The next result that we tapped into from the Montoya Iona et al. Study in developing this plan was the importance of forest edge habitat for the species. So most of the roosts that were documented for the species were within 50 meters of a forest edge. So that's 100 of the 129 roosts that were located in the study. The creation of forest edge habitat also supports bat movement and foraging. This species typically forages along forest edges, and the 2020 HT Harvey acoustic monitoring on Maui, particularly in the Kula region, found that Opeapea foraged in gulches, low density developed areas, and grasslands. And the final sort of piece of evidence that I'm going to highlight that we drew on for developing this plan, and this speaks to the Tier 2 and Tier 3 mitigation. So Auwahi's Tier 2 and Tier 3 mitigation involve funding bat research within the Tier 1 Waiahu mitigation area. So this study, during this study, Opeapea were observed foraging and were captured over artificial ponds. Dietary analysis identified insect taxa associated with ponds, and it led to installing an additional artificial ponds as part of the Tier 4 bat mitigation efforts. Since that time, bats have been documented foraging over and drinking from those newly installed ponds under the Auwahi Tier 4 mitigation plan. Water availability in general and access appear to play a key role in reproduction. We haven't been able to document this for Opeapea, but for other species. The Tier 6 plan, we provide details on some of the studies that indicate lactating female bats make more frequent visits to water sources, and access to water may influence both lactating females and first-year pup survival. So looking in more detail at our plan, those pieces of evidence and scientific understanding influence the development of our strategy for Tier 6 plan. We are referring to this as a Pu'u'io mitigation area. Pu'u'io is that sort of pu'u, the named pu'u in the center of the map here. I'll detail more of the specific objectives and actions included in the plan in a later slide, but I just first wanted to provide an overview and orient you to this slide. I know Kinsley did a bit of this, which was helpful, so I'll just dive into it a little bit more. This is on Ulapalakulu Ranch land in East Maui. It's a location where we have completed other tiers of our mitigation and have a good working relationship with the ranch. So this has been developed in communication with that landowner. This figure shows it's connected to portions of our Tier 4 mitigation outplanting and continues some of that native forest outplanting down the gradient from that sort of forming that Mauka to Makai connection. The entire mitigation area, which is outlined in yellow, is the 511 acres. The portions that are in green, so on that northern boundary, and then along the gulch in the middle of the southern portion and around the Pu'u, will be targeted for native forest outplanting with a fully closed canopy. So that would cover 20% of the full mitigation, or roughly 105 acres, with that native forest fully closed canopy goal. These corridors and landscape features maximize forest edge habitat in a way, so they're roughly 100 meters across, and that allows to maximize that forest edge habitat that is used by the bats and shown to be preferred in that Hawaii Island study.
Great.
Across
Julia,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt, but I'm having a hard time following. Are you able to put your cursor over the areas you're talking about? I'm trying to go back and forth between the key and the colors, and so wasn't really following any of that. I don't understand the difference between the teal and the orange when they're both highlighted. Can you?
Absolutely. Can you see my cursor on the screen here?
Yep, now I can.
Okay, so this teal section is targeted for native forest dense canopy outplanting.
Okay.
And that is that section, the Pu'u'io here, and then along this gulch as well. And so that will be fenced and ungulates kept out to ensure that dense native forest canopy planting.
So I can't quite tell from the, it looks like that's mostly a deforested landscape. Is that true in all of those highlighted areas? Because outside of it, I see a few trees or a few groves.
Yes, it is heavily grazed currently. And I have some photos from the site that I'll show as well of these locations. There are a few trees, and I'll go into a land cover map. There are a few trees deep in this gulch section, and so we'll be adding to those. So there are a few more mature trees right in the middle here, but we would be adding around to support this gulch habitat and to augment that with more native forest.
Okay, was that the gulch that there is acoustic monitoring on, or am I thinking of a different gulch?
A different gulch.
Okay, so just to clarify, you got the teal areas, you have kind of a flat area, you have a pu'u, and you have a gulch. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. And this flat area connects up to our tier 4 outplanting, so it will help continue this row of forest down this is sort of the northern boundary of Ulupalakua ranchland.
Okay, and then the silviculture, did you say that's going to be in rows?
So that silviculture will be 1 tree per acre, so it will end up looking a bit like this portion down here. So it will be dispersed, individually fenced, or small clusters of trees fenced. And for that, we're targeting trees that have been documented as bat roosts and other sort of fruit trees that would support prey, like a variety of bat prey in this area as well.
Thank you.
So just since we're asking questions about this map, so the red lines are existing fence line. Is that deer fencing or just pigs?
The red fencing is for the current cattle use out there. What we will be doing is changing out quite a bit of this fencing because there is a bit of barbed wire that is used. And so we will be removing all of that barbed wire and replacing it with fencing as appropriate for what the target is for that location. So in this area on this northern border where we're trying to establish native vegetation, we'll be using fencing that will keep deer out. This is a big thing that Ulupalakua Ranch is interested in as well, so they can manage the deer herds and the ungulate removal moving between this neighboring parcel and their parcel.
But it
so
won't
any of
totally
this
exclude the deer, right? Because you're just putting the deer fence around that kind of rectangular corridor area, right? It's not going to completely cut them off from coming in.
Well, there's deer fencing already on this portion up here.
Okay.
And we'll be running the deer fencing down to the road.
Got it. Okay, so is the goal 0 ungulates within the 600 and whatever acres?
The goal is 0 ungulates within the native outplanting and then continued pasture grazing around the civil pasture, around this lower density planting area.
Right. I'm sorry. I should be clarifying to say the word feral or wild ungulates. So no feral or wild ungulates within this space. Is it a 0 tolerance?
Our 0 tolerance will be within the native outplanted areas to promote that growth. The ranch we support, and the ranch continues to work on removing deer and goats from all of their lands because it impacts their cattle grazing ability. And so
yes and no, sorry. I'm super familiar with that. Like we conducted studies of the wild ungulate impacts and in this general area, I will say. So very familiar with that, but there's a difference between 0 tolerance and we want to still continue to have some commercial harvest and we want to maintain some level of ungulates on the landscape. There's a difference between that. So I'm just asking for that clarification. Okay, but I'm super familiar with like deer jump fences. So are you telling me that you're going to have deer exclusion type fencing, which I know is substantially more expensive on those tiny areas, like from a linear versus area perspective? It seems like if you're actually surrounding those outplanting areas with deer-proof fencing, you're almost at the same benefit. I mean, you're almost at the same cost from a linear perspective to just surround the whole area. So I'm just trying to like logically understand the linear fencing versus the area benefit. So I'm so sorry to keep interrupting you, but I have a lot of background knowledge and I'm just trying to get to some very specific points.
Right.
Thank you for your patience.
No, that's fine. I think we will be working through the fencing specifics with the ranch in collaboration with the ranch. I think what we have put in the plan at this point, and Troy, feel free to chime in here if you have more awareness around this, is deer fencing around the native outplantings, because that is where we need to ensure that those plants survive and make it up, are able to develop in the canopy height as well. And then around the other portions where we'll be removing barbed wire and reinstalling fence, we would install fence in collaboration with the ranch based on their preferences and those pieces that are sufficient to meet their need for moving cattle from one portions to another.
Okay.
And Troy, am I speaking to that accurately?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, Melissa, I think we have zero tolerance in the green areas. In the orange areas, deer could still move into those areas. We'll be protecting the individual plants, trees, outplantings in those areas from the deer. But that's not the orange won't be a zero tolerance area unless at some point the ranch decides that's what they want to do. So
Okay. Yeah, thank you for those explanations. I think conceptually, just a couple of things. One thing that I'd like to put in if we're Kinsley, if we're developing a list of recommendations for today, is that the plan needs to specify deer exclusion fencing, because the ungulate fencing is a very broad term that can mean many things. So we'd like to see that specified in the plan, and much more specific as far as like be clear about which areas are which kind of ungulate fencing, and it needs to be enshrined into the HCP itself. Again, from a cost per area perspective, to me, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense from a overall habitat benefit perspective to like build a bunch of really expensive deer fencing in an area that's not maximizing the area that you're protecting, when you could be building it, like you could build the same linear feet and protect a much larger area. So that's just a comment. And then just one more point of clarification, the fruit trees that are being outplanted in that intermediate area, is that intended for harvest and agriculture, or is that being planted only because of the bats? And I'll just note that from a habitat management perspective, that a bunch of fruit trees that are going unharvested are going to be a pig attractant and overall not necessarily provide net benefit to the area. But if the intent is you're working with a farmer and their goal is to harvest fruit, then that's kind of, you're trying to kill two birds with one stone, and it's the core intent is not bats. It's, we want to grow fruit trees. It happens to maybe have some roosting benefits for bats. So I just want to kind of clarify intent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main intent is, so the ranch is interested in incorporating this sort of silvopasture planting work in their objectives, I think primarily for improving the grazing and the harvest capacity underneath the trees as well, and in the shadow of the trees across this acreage. The target of fruit trees is because of the known roosting potential in some of those lychee and mango trees that we have seen in other parts that the bats have been using pretty heavily in those locations. We are also interested in including in partnership with the ranch like ulu, which is something that they would then be able to harvest. We, in our agreements with the ranch, will be incorporating harvesting time frames and restrictions so that if any harvest does occur, it would not impact pups that may be in the tree or maternity roosts that may be in the tree.
Okay, I think, yeah, thank you so much for those explanations. I think, again, I'll just note that I think when you're planting fruit trees, and I mentioned pig attractants, but it could also be a rat attractant, that kind of thing. So I know that they're known to roost in the mango and lychee trees. There hasn't been enough research to show whether that results in increased reproductive success. So I think we need to keep in mind really logical source sink dynamics that haven't been tested. So maybe those provide really big trees with lots of branch options for them to hang in. And I think that the research showed that they were kind of way out on the tips of them where maybe rats were less likely to be able to get to them. But those trees are fundamentally rat attractants. And so I think just kind of logically thinking through the kinds of trees that are going to benefit bats. Yes, they've been seen a lot in those, but presence does not mean benefit. And so that's something I think we've kind of tried to bring up again and again, that just because something's there doesn't mean that it's actually providing increased reproductive success. So just something to keep in mind in that area. And so, yeah, if the goal is fruit harvest, I don't know that I've seen any research about that being in conflict with bat reproductive success. Like harvesting the fruit doesn't, I don't think, result in harm to the bats, right? Harvesting the trees means you've lost the benefit of the tree. So that's different. But anyways, I think it's a complicated issue. And yeah, I think I'm mostly the clear thing I think is the fencing is great that you guys put in the barbed wire removal. But the new fencing that's being installed doesn't necessarily protect the area from other things if it's just to keep the cattle in. So anyways, I know we've got more presentation to do, so I should probably finish that.
Happy to take the input and feedback as it comes up to folks. So thank you for that. One more item I was going to highlight on this before we move on. The blue dot here is the location where we will install an artificial pond and water retention feature that will provide a drinking resource and then additional foraging opportunities as it develops more into a water resource there. So this figure 5 from the plan shows, and this goes to some of your question, Kavika, about how much of the land is grazed right now versus how much is treed at this point. So this is the land cover area map, shows that within the area currently proposed for Tier 6, it's 95% pasture/hay and is actively grazed by Ulapalakua Ranch cattle. 4% of the area is in forest or scrub land cover. So this is what I was speaking to. There's like small, in some of the gulches, there's some more mature trees that have been retained over time. And these are some photos of the Pu'uio mitigation area to kind of highlight the portions that we're talking about for the mitigation. So most of it is this grass area with some of these gulches coming down through the middle. This is where the water feature would be located, is at the base of this. So it would help with runoff and then also support water for the bats and potential foraging in the future. This is one of those narrow sections that has some trees retained. So there's a few mature trees in there, but this would be augmented with additional trees surrounding this area and add to that native forest location. This is a photo.
Sorry, quick question. What tree species is that?
I believe it's koa, but it might be eucalyptus. George, do you know?
Yeah, hi everyone. Good morning. There are some guava in there, and yeah, eucalyptus and some silk oak. So I think some other species that are called out in the plan, but those are some of the tree species in that area.
Thanks. And then, did you say those are in the gulch? Because I don't see from the photos, unless that's on the left one, that dark green is the canopy, the far left in the gulch.
That's sort of the section of it. This might actually be the adjacent portion that has this. There's not much tree area within the mitigation location that we're looking at.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the previous map that showed the gulch was shrub, and that doesn't look like shrub to me. So I was just, unless it's those, I guess those two little dark green dots.
Yeah, I think those are kind of the trees. And then the trees that you're seeing in that other photo, I think, are more this location on the side of the.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out in this photo, so this is looking up towards our Tier 4 mitigation area. These are the trees that are outplanted there that have grown, that are growing currently. And so we will be connecting down this fence row with that additional planting to add some of that Malcolm Mackay feature, landscape feature, and edge habitat for the bats. Next, I have a few photos of some of the fencing out there. So some of the fencing has multiple layers of barbed wire, others this with just a single layer of barbed wire on the top. We'll be removing all of the barbed wire from the area and then coordinating with the ranch in terms of replacing fencing and upgrading fencing, as we kind of spoke about earlier. This is one of the gates that the ranch uses to move cattle through the property. And so there are a few gaps in the outplanting areas where these passageways need to be maintained. And so those will continue to be, so there'll be fencing sort of around to maintain that passageway through. And this is looking back at the entire mitigation again, and the objectives, minimization actions, and mitigation actions that we have proposed for this work. So our first objective is to enhance long-term protection. This area is under an agricultural conservation easement, as Kinsley mentioned. We'll be working with the ranch to add specific details into a long-term plan, into a MOA with them to add specific details around the bats and protecting it for the bats for the mitigation as well. That is in draft form right now. As soon as we get that finalized and are able to sign off on that, that will allow us to begin, once we have the approval and we have that agreement in place, then we'll be able to begin implementing the mitigation as soon as those pieces come together. So we anticipate being able to begin this pretty quickly after approval. The minimization, so objective 2 is to minimize threat and increase the quantity and quality of roosting and foraging habitat. And we will be completing that through minimization action 1 is the removal of 17,000 linear feet of barbed wire. Mitigation action 1 is installing and maintaining 19,000 linear feet of fencing for the planting of the native trees. Mitigation action 2 is ungulate removal in the native forest outplantings. Mitigation action 3 will be native tree forest corridor planting, and that will encompass greater than 20% of the entire mitigation area. So we're looking to get that to be a dense canopy cover, native forest, and then more dispersed canopy in terms of across the other civil pasture planting, with the remainder of the mitigation area included in that. And we'll be using, again, those tree species that have been documented for maternity roosting. Mitigation action 5 is invasive vegetation control to enhance the survival of native vegetation within the mitigation area. And then mitigation action 6 is water feature installation to support bat foraging and drinking resources, as well as minimizing that runoff and potential fire suppression. Any questions here? I know we've talked through a bit of this. I do have a few more slides. I can go through.
I'm fine with completing the presentation, and then we can ask any remaining questions personally.
Okay.
I'll defer to the rest of the committee.
Okay, thumbs up, great. So some of the tree species that we're targeting for the plantings that we've called out, and we've added to this since our meetings with USGS to detail some of those other pieces that would support bat prey availability. So in the forest corridor outplantings, we're going to be creating that native forest and edge habitat. We'll establish canopy cover with those fast-growing koa, oheamauka, and neneleu, and then interspersing with some slower growing but beneficial iliahi, wiliwili, koaia, and then some of the native species that are known bat roosts, such as ohia and llama. For the understory, we plan to increase structural complexity and add prey availability with a'ali'i, nayo, and mamane, as well as others that are identified in the Madeiros 1998 sort of Auwahi western, this sort of leeward side plantings that have been highlighted in that research. For the lower density, the civil pasture outplanting, oh, George, I'm so sorry. I had anticipated George presenting this slide and I just cruised right through it. All right, sorry about that, George. For trees planted at the lower density, we'll plant 1 tree per acre as individual or small clusters of fruit trees, such as ulu, lychee, mango, some of those which are known as maternity roosts for opeapea as well. I'll just give you all the hard questions then, George, since you didn't get to present. Okay, so with this, we're going to be using a weight of evidence success criteria. So the goal is to meet 2 or more of these conditions to show enhanced foraging and roosting habitat across the site. So the conditions that we're proposing are seasonal increase in bat acoustic activity. So an increased call files or feeding buzzes during the maternity season. Timing of nightly acoustic activity relative to sunset. So the first acoustic detection or peak in acoustic activity will move closer to sunset, which can indicate that the bats are either roosting nearby and making use of the site quickly after emerging, and or they are prioritizing coming to this location shortly after sunset for foraging. An increase in the nightly foraging duration, which would just highlight using this landscape more, sticking around the area additionally. Number 4 is the use of the water feature, so an increase in call files or buzz rate at the new water feature. And then documented day roost use within the mitigation area. And we would confirm a technique for that with coordination with DOFA and US Fish or species experts. And as Kinsley alluded to, the strategy here is to do consistent acoustic monitoring. And if there are pieces that key us into thinking that there might be a day roost in the area, then we would follow up with additional strategies to confirm in coordination with those teams mentioned. The next slide looks at our adaptive management responses. So for objective 1, which is securing the protection of the mitigation area, the success for that would be executing the agreement, and there would not be adaptive management around that. For objective 2, increasing the quality and quantity of habitat for Opeopea for roosting and foraging in the mitigation area. If we meet 2 or more of those success criteria as documented, then it would demonstrate effectively enhancing the mitigation area by the end of the permit term. If by year 5 we have met 1 of those, but not 2, and the trend is neutral or trending positive, then we would conduct another year of analysis, as that can strengthen regression models. If the bat activity is decreasing, including in the outplanting area after year 5, and none of these conditions have been met yet in the success criteria, then we would move directly into the adaptive management portion, which could include installing a second one. Some of this would be, the adaptive management measure would be in consultation with US Fish and DOFA, and it would include items that seem like they are performing well at the site and augmenting those portions of it. So installing a second water feature near the mitigation area. If the forest canopy cover is not at the percentage that we are targeting by year 5, then we would complete additional supplemental outplanting or additional species that are likely to attract more or diverse bat prey species. And that is my last slide.
Julia, could you go back to that real quick? Could I say one clarifying thing here?
Absolutely.
Kinsley, in Kinsley's staff presentation, she brought up the note that there seemed to be some inconsistencies between the way we described adaptive management here related to additional planting versus what is described in section 7.3 of the document. And I was just looking at that in parallel here, and it's actually it's just some incorrect. It's just incorrect in section 7.3. So it's correct here. Basically, the idea is we start the outplantings with the idea of achieving at least 20% coverage by the end of the 10-year term. We're going to check in on that at year 5, and if we're not at least 15% by year 5, then we would start adaptive management. And so the idea being, if we're hitting 15% by year 5, we have pretty good confidence we're going to get to 20 in another 5 years. It's just incorrectly stated in 7.3, so we can talk more about that later, but we'll certainly make those modifications to make sure it's all consistent. So sorry about that.
Thanks for jumping in there, Troy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, Troy, I picked up on that the other day myself, and me and Kinsey were talking about that section, so that'd be great to be updated so it reads a little bit more clear. Where are we at? So I guess at this point, if there's questions from the public, they can go ahead and provide comments and stuff on Zoom. And I guess the committee can, at this point, provide any of their comments that they would like to get in a.
I still have questions.
I'm sorry?
Before we go to public, I still have questions.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to the public yet. I just told the public if they have questions, they can go ahead and put it in an email. And we'll go ahead to ESRC committees to, provide their comments that they have on the plan. And we can develop a recommendation slide right now if we'd like.
Yeah, I can prepare that, but I think a few of us might want to go back to a few of the slides, so we'll need that on the screen for the time being. So since I'm talking, I'll just go. Could you go to the slide with the species list for trees, please? Yeah.
Here you
Okay, so one thought, this Ohimauka, the Policius oahuensis, I am not, so I'm a botanist by training, if you didn't know. I am not intimately familiar with this tree. I'm not sure that how it would do at that elevation and rainfall. Is that known to do well in the area, or why did you folks pick that one?
I'm definitely teeing this up to George. George, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's found on the ranch, identified in the Madero's study and or that plant species list, and it's doing well in that elevation, even lower, about 1,000 at the ranch offices. They have a outplanting, including some of these species in this list that are doing well, and there is some in the neighboring land in Kula Forest and on OW Ranch, I guess.
Okay, thanks. And then these all the species on this list were for that densely planted area, is that right?
Yes, the top portion is for that densely planted area in that native forest section.
So I'm glad that you're recognizing that several of these species are notoriously slow growers. So can you go into a little bit more about how you are envisioning how these will be contributing and at what time frame?
Go ahead, George. You have thoughts on that?
Ideally, we want to prioritize the fast-growing tree species, canopy species, and some of these are tree species, but they wouldn't be in that height at that time frame. So establishing the faster-growing tree species and supplementing with these understory slower-growing species. So I think the plan proposes, if you go to the timeline, 2 years to get the outplantings out, and our current methods include supplementing with the initial planting with some of those diverse native diversity or the understory species, but prioritizing the faster growing species such as koa or kuaia or nenelea or ohimauka.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify. I know Melissa brought up a comment earlier about slower growing species. So I would agree that it is a good strategy to start with the quicker growing ones and pepper in the slower growing ones. And over time, you're going to get more diverse and robust, resilient forest. So it's nice to see that approach. I appreciate it. So this.
Can I add something here
Kavika,
quickly?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Julia, and then I'll I had a quick follow-up question on the timing thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want to add too that George and his team out there do a really great job in the tier 1 and tier 4 areas of working with PEP and some of the other teams on the island to incorporate, NIO and other species that are more limited in the islands. And so just a shout out to their team that has been working well on our other mitigations, and I think we'd be able to implement that here as well. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the things I'm always having to do is keep in mind which hat I'm wearing. And in this case, if I'm just wearing my hat of saying, what kind of restoration do I want to see? Then I love all of this kind of diversity and all these kinds of things and what you just gave a shout out to, which is fantastic. Our role right now is to evaluate how much this is making up for the bats that are killed. And so my question is specifically for the HCP office and potentially for Danica, which is, when we're crediting for these outplantings and the benefits are not going to be seen potentially for 10 to 15 years in terms of providing habitat, and yet the mortalities are happening right now or have already taken place, you have this lag in the number of pups produced, reproductive capacity, all that kind of thing. Essentially, is there a discounting that occurs for the benefit that the applicant is credit or the permittee is credited for in terms of there's tremendous loss taking place right now that it won't be made up for until much later. And yeah, I'll leave my question to that specifically for now. So that's specifically for the HCP office and Danica.
Just typically with lost productivity, that's usually accounts for when mitigation starts later than they anticipate and is behind the level of take. But I think that's a good point, Melissa. It's more complex than that because if you implement mitigation, you're not going to necessarily have the positive effects for the species until years later. So I could look into more specifics behind that of how we can kind of mitigate for that kind of issue, and then maybe Danica could speak to that as well, but I think that's a good point. It's not necessarily when you implement the mitigation, but when the mitigation reaches the area in which it's providing that net benefit to the species. So I don't think the statute necessarily accounts for that, but yeah, maybe there's a way in which we could try to account for that. Maybe Danica wants to speak as well.
Hi, this is Danica. I don't have a great answer for you, Melissa, because I think it's HCP specific. And my understanding is that for each HCP, they have been written to account for lost productivity. And if they don't, then that's an issue. But my understanding is that most HCPs contemplate the lost productivity that happens when mitigation is delayed. But I don't help at all with crediting or assessing credit, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, that's all I have. Thanks. Sorry, it's not a very good answer.
Yeah, no, thank you, Danica. So essentially you're saying that's an HCP office question in regards to whether this was the lost productivity during that 10 or 15 year or whatever delay has been accounted for.
Yeah, and I think that would take them looking back at their records and doing an in-depth analysis if they don't have it off the top of their head.
Yeah, I think what's in the back of my mind is that this is tier 6. And so essentially, if you're starting this at the beginning of the permit and you've got 30 years or whatever to essentially see the benefit come in, then the benefit comes in within the permit period. If you're at tier 6, what year are we? Can someone remind me what year we're at in this permit?
The permit runs through 2037.
2037. So we're at the 20 out of 30 year point, essentially. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially at the point that the benefit kicks in, more or less, it's the end of the permit period already. And so essentially you're not seeing the benefit of the mitigation during the permit period, which I just want to flag again. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the specifics on how that works. That's ultimately a Danica question, but it's my job to flag when I think it might not make up for the losses that are occurring, because that's our job. And so, yeah, I just want to flag that. And I don't know that it's something we can answer today, but I do want to put a pin in that for the HCP office.
Definitely. I just want to say before I go black again, You know, I appreciate that comment, Melissa. I think it's helpful for the permittee to hear that that's the type of concerns that ESRC members have. You know, since there's about 11 years left in this permit term, you know, there's still time to address those issues. It's not like it expires next year and they're looking at not being able to demonstrate net benefit. So I think that's helpful for permittees to hear that, you know, you guys are still already thinking about demonstrating net benefit in 11 years. So, but the HCP team and I will continue to work together on this.
Yeah, and I think the broader concern is that essentially the time clock on making up for the losses doesn't start until the trees are mature, right? They're not providing habitat for the species until they reach some level of canopy cover. And so that's my broader concern, is that those deaths are occurring right now. We already have a really difficult time proving that you're actually producing new pups that make up for that loss. And then now add to that the fact that that habitat won't be there for them for another 10 years. And in the intervening time, you don't have habitat for them to produce pups and make up for the losses. What I want to pair that with is the importance of minimization, which I didn't hear comments on any further minimizations that might take place in this conversation today.
Melissa, could I add, or Jason, could I add maybe one more thought on that topic? I think you're hitting on something there, Melissa, that is, you know, I would say fundamentally why the agencies have sort of shifted away from this tiering idea, you know, and now as we look at new HCPs or future amendments or whatever, I think the expectation will be that the mitigation is, you know, handled more upfront, and there will still be a little bit of a lag at the beginning, but then you would really see more of the benefit during the course of the permit term. So I think that's, you know, sort of like bigger picture. I think that maybe that is being rectified as we move into the future, and agree that I think as we look back at the way the HCPs were written in the past with the tiering and other, you know, kind of other requirements with the SSMIPs, that's been something that I think all of the projects have been sort of struggling with. So just wanted to, you know, say we appreciate that. And even if we're, you know, we were just a minute ago talking about like tree growth effectively, like, you know, even though things grow really fast in Hawaii, even when you're talking about a decade or more, you know, you still need time to see those benefits. So yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Yeah, I just wanted to point out too, I mean, there's a suite of things happening here, and growing trees is just one of them. So there are things being implemented right off the bat that can help the survival of these bats by removing the barbed wire, by putting a water feature in, different outplanting, ungulate fencing. So, but very good question, and this is something that we will really look into to try to get some answers for that lag in mature trees for bats. But Kinsley, did you have something?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, kind of coupled with what Troy said, essentially, yeah, like we just approved the KWP, new HCP, and trying to have those mitigation plans more thoroughly developed so that we can start implementation right away and not have those tiers, I think is a way in which we can address. But I think it's a good point that not necessarily was accounted for, you know, looking at these specific outplanning natural history factors. I don't think those are necessarily accounted for when we planned the statue and, you know, relation to lost productivity. So I appreciate you bringing it up, Melissa. Okay.
Darren?
Yes, I have two things that I guess are sort of a follow-on to Melissa's comments. And one was, so next week we have the HCP reviews. And so is minimization going to be covered in presentations next week? Like what Auwahi's doing related to minimization? Okay. And so that
at the facility. So we were focused more on just tier 6 for this portion. And so next week we'll be talking about some of the minimizations that are occurring at the facility.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll put a plug in for, would like to get some detailed information on that next week as this tier 6 is being considered. I think, so this HCP or this plan is for 511 acres. And so is that but only 20% of that area, there's restoration is occurring in just 20% of those 511 acres, but the credit is for the 511 acres. Am I understanding that correctly? I don't know if that's an HCP staff question.
I can speak to that. So the native forest outplanting, that sort of dense canopy cover, will be at that 20% of the full 511 acres. And then across the other portions of it is where we will do that dispersed tree planting and removing barbed wire across the entire portion of it. And then the water feature is another portion that's being added across that 500 acres. But the dense canopy closure plantings will occur at that 20% level.
And so that, I guess, so DOFA, your evaluation was that I guess that water feature and the fencing changes in that larger area were sufficient for them to be credited for that full 511 acres?
I think after talking to Julia and her team and looking at previous research related to bats and the species, looking at their need to have not too densely forested areas and edge habitat, and then in combination with these roosting trees that will be outplanted as well in the silvopastoral area, I think, yeah, it's not just 20% restoration efforts because, like Julia mentioned, there's the pond, there's the fencing over across the whole 511 acres. So I think looking at it from that suite of actions across the 511 acres and that interconnection that the bats can travel amongst the areas and utilize the pond and the roosting areas as well as, this native forest outplanting areas, I think that alleviated our concerns. I don't know if Jason wanted to speak additionally.
Yeah, I guess, so for the 102 acres, only 20% of that will be covered, or 20% of the 511 acres. I just want clarity on that.
Yeah, 20% of the 511 acres, which is that 102, 105. I think we have it as 105.
I see. Okay. I kept getting tied up in the 7.3, trying to read that last paragraph, but, okay.
Yeah, and I think some of this comes from the H.T. Harvey study that showed the bats using the gulch habitat and then using the grassland habitats on Maui, and those being some of the preferred foraging locations. And so trying to create those forested features while also allowing for the continued grazing, which provides the Coleoptera species, the grasslands, which provide some of the Lepidoptera species for forage, and then this mixture with native trees providing additional forage in the that comes out of the the ali'i and the koa that are going to be planted in those areas.
Yeah, being on, I had a little trouble like thinking about the lower end of the spectrum. The bat guidance document really talks about 20 to 40 acres, somewhere in there in that area being, what is needed for habitat. But with understanding the use of bats and their use of the area made me feel a little bit better about being on that lower end. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I do think, we should be, asking folks to, possibly have a 30-acre per bat situation, being in between that 20 and 40 acres of useful habitat. But with that said, where this project's going to be situated and the connectivity it has with the other mitigation areas made me feel a little bit more comfortable about having that 21.63333 acres. So I just wanted to share that. And so to me, the suite of things that are happening across the landscape make me feel like it's viable. I would like to talk a little bit more about the outplanting fencing, maybe having some sort of pig management in the area that can address some of those threats. pigs, there's multiple things that can offset the bat. And so talking about that a little bit too would be good.
Okay, I'm still not done with this slide. Melissa took my thing and ran with it. We went in a different direction,
Okay.
but I'm fine to talk about that stuff, but I want to finish a few questions on this slide first, if we can.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So for the third bullet, you folks are talking about outplanting plants that'll increase bat prey availability, which I think is an awesome approach. I'm not familiar with the Medeiros et al. 98 study and what it concluded. Were there, Matt, Art's a botanist. How did that publication connect these plants with bat prey?
That is a bit of me condensing pieces from our plan. So more of those bat prey species have come in from conversations with USGS folks. I know that Karina Pinzari is currently working on a paper on this. And then there are other, I think Chris Todd had some papers looking at diet and relating it to true species in some of the outplantings, relating it to plant species and bat diet across these areas. So the Medeiros study the Medeiros paper highlights the plants that were native to this area and to this leeward side of the island, and that are considered native and important to this part of Hawaii. And then of those, the ones I listed here, the a'ali'i, the nayo, and the mamane are ones that have supported insect prey species for bats.
Yeah, that seems like a bit of a bridge too far for me. I'm thinking about a'ali'i, but when I think about bat prey, I'm thinking about native moths, which will be around white flowered species in the evenings. The species that have co-evolved with the moths are native moths, which are seemingly are prey, or potentially things that have fruit that will fall and attract native Drosophila. A'ali'i is neither of those. So I'm just really curious what bat prey a'ali'i is providing habitat for.
I would have to follow up on the specifics with Karina and that team that has been doing that work. That hasn't been published yet. George, do you have additional details? I know you went to some of those talks at HCC last year.
I think those are specifically from the USGS Waiho study when they did the insect sampling and then the captive rearing from those host plant species, and those are the host species that had the insects that were found in the bat diet.
So. Okay. All right. I don't know.
So it's essentially, I guess, could become more
a bit
like
of a stretch to me, but for a'ali'i specifically. But I
think it's a little bit more at the caterpillar stage that the insects are using these plants, and then at the moth stage there, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe.
And I would just add really quick, Kavika, I think the other in the document itself, probably the next sentence is the more important one, which says, consultation with species experts will occur to refine the plant species list. So we're going to have an ongoing discussion with USGS and others as we refine that palette. So this is just a little bit of an index, yeah.
Okay. And then for the silviculture, so Melissa brought up a really good point about attracting rats, which I wasn't even thinking about. I was originally thinking this was a great idea. Now I'm kind of concerned about it. I'm thinking that it might be wise to do some kind of predator control, like good natures that other HCPs do, maybe strategically at the base of these trees that you're hoping to be roosting sites, or maybe at the water feature. I don't know. It's just something hadn't had in my brain, and now I'm thinking about. But I see Karen has her hand up, and that was the last comment I had on this slide. So, Karen.
sorry, I don't have the answer on Auwahi right now. I gotta check in with with the team here. But I guess related to this the fruit tree planting, I think Kavika's line thing, it's like those trees aren't going to be roost size within 10 years, right? Like even if you plant like a well-grown nursery lychee, it's within 10 years, it's not likely to be a roost size. So I guess to that point of like predator control around those roost trees, that would be outside the time of what we're talking about, right? I mean, realistically, any of that roost tree growth work doesn't occur within this 10-year period.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. But the water feature, we could do rat control around the water feature.
That they're just foraging at though, right? Like that's a
No, but
flyby.
it's more like just trying to control predators within this mitigation area. I think if rats are known predators on bats and we're trying to make more bats, seems like that would be a smart thing to do within this mitigation area.
Yeah, I guess I would just highlight that because I brought up the predator issue before. I wouldn't be concerned about rats on the ground. I'd be concerned about rats in the trees. So as far as the water feature goes, yeah, I have a few other questions, but I'll defer. I don't want to interrupt the flow of conversation here.
And maybe I'll just say real quick, I think another thing there, I was going to ask this earlier, Melissa, but it sounded like part of that, I mean, obviously the rats are attracted to fruit, on the tree or on the ground or whatever. But I think it sounds like one of the things you were noting was just wanting to make sure that if fruit trees are planted, that there probably is a harvest plan associated with it. So you may still have the attractant in the tree, but at least you won't have a bunch of rotting fruit on the ground. I mean, maybe that's, kind of meeting halfway there to work with the ranch to make sure that if we decide to plant certain fruit trees out there, that there's interest and a plan to do some harvest out there to minimize the amount of fruit on the ground and so forth. I don't know, just a thought.
Lychee season is the same season as pumping season.
Pumping season, yeah. Okay, there you
yeah,
go.
they're both in May and June. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the bigger concern is what are you being credited for, right? So are you being like going back to the question of the restoration area versus what you're being credited for? It's really great. I'm so happy to see the barbed wire removal taking place across the site. But I think how that is credited for in terms of a land area is a really important question. And so basically any area that you remove barbed wire fence from, is that automatically going to be credited in the future to folks trying to offset that take? I would argue that barbed wire removal alone should not constitute credit for an area within the fence where the barbed wire was removed. So the benefit, in other words, of making up for bats lost, are you automatically making up for the bats lost, right? Going to the principle of the thing, are you automatically making up for the bats lost within an area where you've removed barbed wire fence? So the pasture exists as pasture today. That's not a benefit across that area, right? From an area perspective. The mitigation that, outplanting of a fruit tree for an agricultural purpose, are we going to now start crediting that for wind turbines, for offset for wind turbines because you planted an orchard? Do you get credit for that? I think that's the bigger question that I'm trying to put out there of like, what are we actually crediting for here? There's a smaller area where restoration and therefore net benefit is taking place of native outplantings. I'm leaving aside for the moment the question of, is that actually providing a net benefit in terms of making up for bats lost, right? That's the question that we're asked to consider as a committee. But I think it's really important to ask the question of like, what are we actually crediting for here across, you're claiming 600 some acres, and where are improvements actually taking place? You said, oh, a water feature. Well, that water feature is in one particular location. It's not like you have water features across the landscape that you're installing, right? So again, I think just from an area perspective, because that's been determined as how we're crediting for bats is area restored, like what counts as a restored area, I think is a really important question to be considering here.
Thank you, Melissa. I just wanted to share, while I still have it in my mind, bats do use fragmented habitat a lot. They travel from one area to the other. So bats in tier 4 area may use the pond that they're going to develop here. Bats are already transitioning in the landscape when there's no trees there or very little. So there it is habitat already. We're just going, they're just going to be enhancing that. And then I like the predator control aspect just to
Sorry,
touch on.
Jason, before you go back to the predators, can we just stick on that one point for a moment? As far
Sure.
as like the logic of, so you put a water feature. Do we now track bats and say, oh, they traveled 20 miles to come to that water feature? We're now going to make that a radius and that entire area counts as mitigation? Like, again, area used, is that actually something that you should be credited for in terms of making up for bats lost? That's my point. And I think it's a really fuzzy argument to say that you implemented a water feature in one area and now an entire area bounded by the barbed wire removed is being counted as
Well,
mitigation.
yeah, if you read the plan, you'll see that the removal of barbed wire is actually a minimization, but not something contributing to mitigation. Yeah, a very good point on the first thing that you're mentioning. I would have to think about that as far as how a water feature would, provide that benefit across that mitigation area in general. Some of the reading that I did on bats' use of habitat, I read a lot about, where they show them using these fragmented areas and constantly going back and forth from these different areas. And so the interconnectivity of all these landscapes that are being worked on, perked my interest in understanding that this will, build a longer forest corridor and all those different things. But there's a few things that we need to think about here. And I'd like to take a 10-minute break so everyone can just take a break for a second and come back in 10 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. We'll come back at 11:01.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess when we come back, I would like to follow up on that same discussion.
Heard, Karen. Thank you. So is it just waiting for everyone to get back here 1 second. Well, it looks like everyone is back. So we can move forward. Karen, go ahead with your thoughts that you had there.
When I was able to check with the team, so we do have, they confirmed there were prey items, prey diet items that match the caterpillars that were collected from Auwahi in the Auwahi mitigation area. So I guess just to wrap that piece up, but I guess I first want to say, like, I think that this mitigation site is like a really great addition to the mitigation patchwork, right? This lower elevation site on Maui is, I think, what we've been like asking for. You know, I think we've wanted to see these lower elevation sites get created, and so this is, I think, a really great project in that sense. And yeah, I just want to put that out, that's, I think that piece of this in this parcel is like, has a lot of potential that we haven't really seen at some of the other mitigation sites that come through. And I think, Jason, on your line of reasoning with I totally agree that like, you know, these bats travel vast distances over a short period of time. And we certainly have, you know, plenty of examples from whether it's the Maui study or our work on the Big Island, where it's like we're capturing bats at, you know, one elevation in one location, and they're traveling across like multiple properties and multiple things, you know, and roosting maybe in one area and foraging in other areas. And that, like, I don't think that there's any, I think that's well established, and I understand the idea that like these bats can be moving across this entire 511 acre area. But I guess it's like, does that, like, the movement across those areas and these small pockets constitute like them, that credit should be given for that entire area? I mean, because I guess in that line of reasoning, I'm wondering, you know, it's like, you know, they're also in this site's also in proximity to like other DOFA parcels and things, you know. It's like, I guess I'm just not totally understanding the logic of being able to credit such a huge area, so like, you know, with only 20% of it being, you know, sort of actively restored. So I just like to understand that better.
Troy, I just wanted to say something real quick, and then yeah, I see your hand raised. When we review the bat guidance document, where we are trying to see if we're meeting benchmarks to a certain extent, the 20 acres to 20 to 40 acres per bat is talking about a suite of things. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not just 20%, you know, for that one single bat. Let's just say we're using 20 acres as a proxy. That whole 20 acres needs to be forested. From my reading of the bat guidance and other research, it's 20 acres of usable habitat, which is edge, which is water features, which is food availability, which is roost habitat. So that 20 acres needs to have, you know, those a bunch of, you know, parts of those components. And does the rest of the committee, are they thinking in that same train of thought?
But so you talking about like converting it from unusable to usable? I mean,
yes.
So I mean, that under that, I'm thinking then would be saying that this area is unusable for bats at this time, which
Oh, well, so I take that
like
back then, because it's already being used for bats. I would say any area, now I'd have to think about that again. Troy,
Yes, I would add that it is augmenting it. It's improving its usability for bats. And it is improving that by creating more of that edge habitat, by adding in those trees that will develop over time. And through our relationship with Ulapalakua Ranch, and with that this area is under a permanent conservation agricultural easement, that this will continue to develop and continue to be used in a very similar way beyond the time frame of our ability to impact the landscape. And then I'll let Troy speak.
Yeah, well, thanks. I just sort of even sort of separate from this individual project, just kind of thinking about this. I mean, I think this gets back most of what you were saying. It's like ultimately we're trying to make more bats than we're killing, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to demonstrate. And so I do agree, Jason, you kind of said what I was going to get at is it's not just growing more forest. There's a suite of things that support bats. We understand that. And the success criteria that we've included in this plan and similar to all the other mitigation plans that have been done in recent years. And this plan, actually, I think the success criteria are, even more specific and even more dialed in and attuned to, are bats using it not only at a higher rate, but are they using it in ways that's indicative of, what would result in an increased number of bats or increase in productivity. So, we anchor into our success criteria to determine, are bats using it? We have baseline data collection, and then are the actions that we're doing on the landscape, affecting change basically as it relates to bats. I mean, that's the whole crux of it. So understand the bats use it now. That'll be captured in the baseline data. We'll determine, how much is it changing in response to the management actions. And I would say the other thing, all of this is sort of like wrapped up in this discussion about acres per bat. And, the whole reason that we started talking about that years ago was because it's really difficult to put to determine specifically what it takes to grow a bat. And so we come up with this sort of like surrogate of acreage. And I think that conversation will continue to evolve. In this particular situation, as Julia pointed out at the beginning of her presentation, I mean, it was written into the HCP amendment back in 2019 that we would be utilizing 20.3 acres per bat, and that's what we're doing. In future HCP amendments or new HCPs, there could be a discussion about whether that needs to be something different. But that's really the backbone of what we're proposing here. And so I appreciate the ongoing discussion about this, because I think it really is like the nut we need to crack on bat mitigation in general. But I think in this case, we're not doing anything, we're not proposing anything different or outside the bounds of what was approved in the HCP or what would be expected in mitigation in these areas. So I just wanted to kind of like say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could weigh in a little bit, I think we kind of glossed over some of the work that went into creating this plan. And I just wanted to mention that this team worked really hard to explore all of the alternatives that we could come up with, and meeting with various stakeholders and identifying this as really a good option and the best option that we could come up with through all of that work, and really putting a lot of thought into the best available science and how do we fit that in with the other stakeholders' needs, the ranch's needs. And I think that we have landed in a really solid place. And so I just wanted to, thank everyone, who has put thought into this, and the ESRC for their recommendations and their guidance. And we're certainly going to take all of this into consideration. And so I just wanted to take a moment and to kind of reflect on the work that went into this, and to acknowledge that we did do some alternative analysis in this process.
Thank you. Is there, just a follow-up question, is there irrigation at this site?
There are connected water lines for the for the cattle troughs and things like that around the site.
This area has been in like a decadal drought. The lovely green photos that were shown, I'm not sure exactly when those photos were taken, but I know that
Surprisingly earlier this year, if you
that's
can imagine.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for them. But I know that over the last 10 years, the likelihood of rain has been very low. And so the success of outplantings is really going to be dependent upon whether you can water them. Certainly, gulches tend to collect more water than other areas when it does come, but it's going to be tough to keep those trees alive. So kind of going back to, again, my point I really want to stay centered on today is what is being credited for and the 1 tree per acre kind of thing, and that kind of helping to justify the area calculation. I think I personally feel is a little bit far-fetched, but that it's making up for the losses, the 25 bat loss. But just to like focus on the details for just a moment. If you outplant that 1 tree per acre, what actions are you taking to ensure that those actually live?
Yeah,
If there's
absolutely, Melissa.
given the drought.
Right, yeah, and this is a strategy that some of the other ranches have started using as well. Haleakala Ranch has started doing some of this type of outplanting along the road up to Haleakala National Park and a couple of their other properties. We will be doing individual small fences around these trees to keep the cattle from intruding on them. And then Haleakala Ranch is also working on bucket systems for watering. And so they have several of those out on the trees that they have planted already on this leeward side on the way up. And so we'll work in collaboration with some of the other ranches and with the best strategies around for implementing this kind of outplanting structure.
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with their efforts, which are really fantastic. And they're using koa, and they've got those individual fences around the koa trees. It's not a mango tree that's a high water tree, right? This is a koa tree, and their mortality has been pretty high. They've been able to increase mortality in the koa with those individual fences and doing plantings around the koa trees, but that seem to help, like, kind of the set of that koa plus the outplantings around it seem to increase both success of the koa outplanting as well as you mentioned earlier the greening around it that takes place that provides better cattle feed, and so it's kind of a nice silviculture system. But my familiarity, I've never heard of that with Haleakala's experience being with lychee and mango, which are pretty high water trees, and unless you have irrigation going out to them, I don't see it producing that same success that they've seen with the koa trees that are adapted to that environment. Can you correct me if I'm wrong on that, and I'm just not aware of some additional stuff that's been done?
I do think they've primarily used koa in those outplantings. Our reasoning for targeting some of these other species that as of yet, we haven't documented bats in koa, but we have documented bats and maternity roosts in these other species. In terms of the ability for those types of plants to, types of trees to survive out there, there are already avocado trees that are growing around that area, which are similarly pretty high water. And then I'll let George speak to any other pieces you want to weigh in on here in terms of our team's ability to get those growing and started, and confidence that they'll continue to grow. I mean, we will commit to replanting if anything doesn't make it, but I'll let George speak a little bit more to our confidence in the ability to get those planted.
Yeah, I hear the concern of these plants not getting enough water and potentially dying off. Yeah, in the past we replant, we target the wet seasons to get the plants established. A lot of these plants, once they get established, they don't need any type of irrigation. Similar to Haleakala Ranch, a lot of the watering comes in the initial year, I think the first year of planting, and then once they get going, they pull back from the watering. And similar to our earlier tiers 1 through 5, we are committed to going back and putting similar species back, or other native species that are identified to do better in those areas. So yeah, there are mango trees lower down in lower elevations. There are avocado trees, there are lychee trees nearby, but a lot of those are mature and not irrigated. But I think, yeah, the strategy that we've used in the past is kind of targeting that wet season. And I think you called it out, a lot of those gulch areas are even, in some of these old Hawaiian sites out here in Auwahi, they use rock stacking to kind of collect that moisture. So employing that type of strategy in those areas would increase the survivability of those outplanted species. And anything you guys have, any recommendations you guys have in mind that could increase the survivability, we'd be open to for sure.
Yeah, thank you. And again, the emphasis to me is really on what's being credited. And if across that broader landscape that's kind of getting you to that 20 point whatever acres per bat, if most of that is like outplanting 1 tree per acre, then the question becomes, what's the survivability of that, and how soon does it reach a maturity point where it provides pupping trees, which is kind of the selling point that's being used here. Let's be really optimistic and say it takes 5 years to reach maturity, where you've got them used as pupping trees. In that intervening 5 years, this is a tier 6 mitigation, so you've got 25 bats killed. They pup 2 pups per year, and then over that 5-year time, so you have a loss of a lot more bats than just the 25. You have that lost reproductive capacity, both of them and their offspring. And so it becomes really important that those trees reach maturity quickly, to quickly offset that loss of the 25 bats through the reproductive capacity. And so if, your review takes place after a few years, did they survive? Did they not survive? Okay, we got to replant. How mature of a tree are you outplanting to start with becomes important, so that they reach maturity faster. So just the devil's in the details when we're trying to make up for lost bats, and we have very little data to show that these actions actually result in higher pupping success rates, right? So I think it's just it's easy to get lost in the details. I'm trying to keep to the big picture here of is this actually making up for the lost bats?
So just to chime in here, I think I remember bringing up one of your points, Melissa, earlier in previous meetings with these folks, but I thought we kind of already established that it's not outplanted trees that count, but survived trees. But maybe Troy, you could clarify or confirm that we're all on the same page there.
If I understand you correctly, Kubika, I mean, I think the metrics we're using are survived trees. So we would do initial outplanting, and then, as George noted, I mean, the goal is to, in those densely planted areas, to, those will be densely planted areas. That accounts for the 20% we've been talking about. And so even in those cases, if you do the outplanting and trees die off, there would be supplemental planting to keep those forested. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at.
Well, and that, I mean, I'm not so much worried about the densely planted.
The solar pasture.
I trust you guys that it would be, there'll be some die off, but there'll be a stand of trees there. Was more thinking about the 1 tree per acre.
Yeah.
Outplanted tree, and check a box. That would have to be a survived tree, which I believe is accounted for in the success criteria. But...
That's correct. That is correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Does the success criteria cover that at all? I mean, it seems like that's not.
The success criteria, there's a couple things there. The success criteria are almost exclusively focused on bat activity, as we talked about in the presentation. In the adaptive management plan, though, if we're not meeting our bat if the bats aren't performing as we think they should be, and we start to dig into that, then we start to look at, is it an outplanting issue? Is it a prey issue, or what is it? And we rectify both outplanting and prey base through adaptive management if we're not meeting our bat success criteria. And that is actually a really good point. I was going to note, I think, all the discussion about trees and all that kind of stuff is all, great, and all stuff that will be tracked, and supplemental planting will occur. And we're aiming for survived trees, not just outplanted trees, of course. Ultimately, as we noted a couple of times here, what we're trying to do is demonstrate that, bats, that we're making better habitat for bats. And so that's why we have anchored our success criteria into bat activity at the site, trying to pull as much information out of the acoustic data as we can, and working with Karen and her folks as well. So, that's the, tells the tale, really. And I think helps to alleviate. I mean, I understand the idea that bats move around and use a lot of area, but if we can demonstrate that bats are using this area, at higher rates and in ways that are more indicative that they're roosting on site or nearby, and that we're producing a lot of forage for them, I think we can then all comfortably say that we are, increasing the population in the area. Putting a number to it is always impossible. So I think that's where the habitat surrogacy comes in.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Troy. And I would tend to agree with you. I'm not sure if Melissa's on the same page with demonstrating an increased usage of bats will count, but are you okay with that, Melissa, or you have issue with that?
I think that we've had very extended discussions in the past in which the permittees and applicants across HCPs have essentially stated that it's impossible to document increased reproduction, that they feel like it's beyond the scope of what they're capable of doing at an individual level. I do think that this is a longer discussion into the future of how can we do better at that. But there have been really extensive conversations on that in the past, and what was settled on is this area per bat. And so today I'm staying focused on essentially how are we counting area?
Yeah, but okay.
No, we're not making up for bats. We're not making up for bats. Like, how can we prove it? There's not great data built into this to prove we're making up for bats. There's no monitoring of pupping. It's one of 6 criteria, of which they're saying they only need to meet 2. It's a bat situation across all HCPs. It's not specific to Auwahi. And so, yeah, we've spent a long time discussing that in the past, and I don't know that we need to spin on it today. I don't know where you're expecting me to go with this, but there's, this bat thing is tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, yeah, to me, that seems like appropriate proxy data in the absence of actual data. So, but that's where I'm at on it.
Yeah, as far as the criteria goes, I don't know if they mind putting those 6 criteria, of which they're saying they need to meet 2, back up on the screen again. And I just think that like 2 out of the 6 is a pretty low bar to meet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because we have just 35 minutes left, is that right? And I do think it's very important that we get to those success criteria.
You're all seeing my screen. Did that share go through? So this is built off of ways that we are trying to answer these questions in other parts of the country, and in terms of we don't have these answers of specific numbers or specific locations that we know bats are producing pups and how many they're producing. And so this weight of evidence approach dives into the acoustic data a little bit more to try and understand better how the bats are using the habitat. And so then that allows us to hone in on ways that we're improving this habitat and that it's showcased in the bat use of the area.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know, Karen, if you want to weigh in. I know USGS has done a ton of research within this area.
Yeah, I guess as like we have, yeah, given the really limited time, I definitely want to visit number 5. And I think this is something that we did provide some feedback on that I think hasn't really changed much since we saw it before, is that, I mean, you guys have, was one of the success criteria is that the roost is used by one individual at like basically one day at any point. And then that's enough to, I guess, check that box, and that's one of the criteria met. And it, given, I think given, especially there are bats in the area, we don't know that they aren't using the area for roosting already. Like that's just a really slim criteria for to meet one bat on one day. And so
I'll provide, Karen, after our conversation, I went and looked at the Montoya Iona data set again to see if there is a criteria within there that we could define this differently. And of the roosts that were documented in there, 62 of this, basically over half, 60% of the trees were used for less than 3 days, which is the minimum time frame that we used in that analysis, in that choice analysis. And so like 39 of the 62 trees that were used in that analysis were just documented for use for less than 3 days, which highlights how frequently these bats move around the landscape and do that roost switching behavior. And so it felt even more, I guess I couldn't find a level that seemed like a reasonable way to show bats using this, knowing how much they do that roost switching. That makes sense.
Right. I guess the flip side of that is that we also know that there are that bats do that there are areas that are used regularly and that they're coming back to, and that there are roost trees that they're using again and again. And we actually, yes, and we know like a single tree being used by a single bat on a single night, like that, it does not, I feel it does not reflect like a long-term benefit to the species, especially if you're considering like that's supposed to mitigate for the take of bats. And so I just think that, you know, we have bats that roost in trees all over for one night. And so that doesn't, so I don't think that to then turn that around to equate to like that you've created great bat roost habitat and that should offset take. I just, there's not like an equivalence there. I don't, yeah.
I think the one thing I could just maybe add there is, and we can, you know, if there's a better way to define it, you know, happy to discuss that. I think the reason we've included this is all the discussion we've had on mitigation plans, you know, around the islands has been focused on like, how do we, you know, both in terms of like elevation and the way we manage the areas, how do we create roost opportunities for bats? And so, you know, most of the other 1 through 4 are really just getting at like, if we see certain behaviors or combinations of behaviors, it gives us a sense that they may be roosting on site or maybe they're roosting nearby or whatever. And then the thinking was like, well, but if we actually document them roosting, that sort of answers the question that we're trying to get at with all the acoustic analysis. And so, I mean, maybe it's, you know, maybe it's more than 1 day, or I'm not sure exactly how to define it, but I think that was the idea. That's why we thought including it would be made sense. The other thing I'll just note is the way we had kind of structured it was, it's not like we're just gonna like walk out on a given day and find a roosting bat. So there would be it would be kind of collecting information from all the acoustic work that's going on, and gaining some level of confidence, like, oh, there's something going on here. We have a lot of activity in an area. Let's go out now and start further investigating whether or not there's roosting behavior happening. So I think it would be kind of a buildup and therefore indicative of kind of a pattern of use. So if we need to, define it differently than 1 bat 1 day, we were honestly just trying to Julia's point, like come up with something specific that could be, monitored. So open to other ideas there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't, we don't have a way to link acoustic activity to roosting. So,
Right.
and from our conversation, I understand that it's like, yeah, there would be certain indicators that maybe you would start looking more heavily in certain areas for roosting, and that's
right. Yep.
That's fine. But yeah, roost, like a roost would have to be confirmed visually. I certainly would not want to yeah, I think linking the acoustics to it at all is problematic. But I think considering something like a maternity roost or roosts like confirmation of a maternity roost or roost trees being used during X many seasons over a period of time, like it doesn't have to be the same roost tree, it could be different ones. I think it's just 1 bat roosting in a tree 1 day is not I think something to be like, we should check this box, this restoration area is working. So I don't know what to say further on that.
Something like some sort of an established pattern of roosting activity, or so. Again, that's whatever that means, but I mean, it's like, something repetitive. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that, if DOFAW allows this criteria to stay in there, I think that it needs to be clarified that the confirmation is visual in some, whether that's by video or other way, or spotting them.
Yeah.
DOFAW would agree with that. And we're developing recommendation slide as we are talking, guys. So we'll bring that up here in just a second.
Thank you. And Karen, I just want to affirm I am in agreement, and the wording here that it meets 2 or more conditions, I think that number 5 needs to be a required condition. And then we can talk about whether 2 or 3 of the others should additionally be met, but number 5 would be an absolute requirement. If you can't document them in the area at some minimal level, then how can you show that this is actually making up for any kind of loss at any kind of minimal level? So that would be a wording change as well.
And I would just firmly push back on that. Sorry, Melissa, but we can't commit to that. I mean, just based on everything we've been talking about bat behavior, how they utilize the landscape, I'll just say we'll be lucky, looking at all the mitigation that we're doing around Hawaii, we'll be lucky to document a roost site. We'll be ecstatic if we do, but I don't think we can have it be a requirement. That would make me really nervous.
I understand your nervousness on that, and it's the mirror side of our concern about how to prove that this is actually working, right?
Yep.
So we're on both sides. We're saying, shoot, how do we approve these things when we don't even know they're making up for these gigantic losses? And on your side, you're saying, shoot, how do we prove this is making up for these tremendous losses, right? It's the mirror side of our concern. So legit. But I think that you do have folks, I understand when folks are off-site and there's been a heavy reliance on, for good reason, because of lack of local capacity, off-site folks doing the contracts on these who are using off-site techniques. So acoustic minimization with no personnel on the landscape. And so that's why the personnel with eyes on bats is so particularly difficult. In this case, you have George on site, and in theory, taking a look at those plants on a regular basis to see how they're doing, checking up on the outplantings. I don't see why you can't look up with a thermal imager or something and check if the bats are there. So that's why I want to kind of push on this a little bit to say, if there is someone on site checking on this restoration output, can we pair that with checking on whether the bats are actually using the landscape?
Yeah, Melissa, I appreciate that input. One of the problems I think here is that the detection probabilities are either extremely low or unknown for all of the various ways which we might try to accomplish this. And so, as Troy was saying, we think it's a relatively low likelihood that George goes out with a thermal camera and actually is able to see one of these bats. You know, there's a lot of unknowns in terms of how far through the foliage can you see, etc. And so it's one of those instances, like Troy said, where if we are able to do it, awesome, great, wonderful, maybe we add to the state of the science, but otherwise we're not going to be able to commit to that.
Yeah, I totally hear you. These are brand new trees being outplanted. They're going to grow over the course of the next 5 to 11 years of the permit period. And during that time, you can see through the leaves pretty easily as these trees grow. So it's a less difficult problem than looking at mature mango and lychee trees. So it's my job to push back on the question, how can you prove you're making up for the loss of these 25 bats? What you're telling me is you can't prove it. It's feeling hand wavy, and I feel like it's my job on this committee to call that out. So I'm just, for the record, stating, if you're saying I can't prove they're using this, even just using it, I can't prove they showed up, let alone that they're pupping and making up for the loss of 25 bats. It's my job to call this out. So again, I know I'm a broken record on this issue, but it's my job on this committee to do that.
And I would highlight, Melissa, that the other 4 success criteria that we've included in terms of the acoustic monitoring and the increase in that activity at the site is what we've used at all of our other mitigation sites and is how we have documented that increase in activity, particularly, at the locations nearby the Waiho mitigation area. We did research for tier 2 and 3, which involved capturing the bats. And that allowed us to know that that mitigation area is being used by reproductive females. And those research components have already had a really challenging time in terms of tracking bats to roost trees, and then even getting eyes on bats in trees when you have a bat tracked to a tree and you know there is a bat in the tree, regardless of the height, canopy closure, eucalyptus, mango, lychee, whatever type of leaf structure you're looking at. It's very, very challenging to spot these individuals in the tree. I think that the Maui, there's been work with Hiko in using thermal imaging to scan trees, and that work has I would just say that through the USGS work, through that work, it is been shown to be very challenging to spot these bats in the tree. And so the reason we included it here is that if we are, as you're saying, out at the site, it encourages our teams to continue checking, to continue looking at those options, to keep up with the science that's developing around how we identify bats in trees, how we confirm their location in trees. And so that was the goal of including this as a potential feature, while still relying on the science and the pieces that we've used for the other mitigations, being the acoustic data and showing that change in activity and use by the bats through that acoustic monitoring.
Totally hear you. And I think we could spend another 5 hours with both of us saying this is really hard. There's 1,000 ways to say this is really hard. This is really impossible to do. Totally in agreement. We have a limited amount of time left. This is Sunshine Lad. We're not allowed to talk as a group outside of this setting. It's my job to be a broken record and say, we're having a really hard time here proving this is making up for it. What I'm hearing you saying is it's really hard to prove we're making up for it. And it's my job to say, yes, we're having a really hard time proving we're making up for the bats. Because my job at the end of the day is to say, is this impacting the species? And are we making up for the impacts on the species? So one bit of logic I just want to call out in preparation for this meeting, I did go back and reread the minutes for Auwahi reviews over the last few years. 2023, when we were reviewing the Tier 5 mitigation, same exact kinds of comments, same exact kinds of concerns. Just because it's appeared in a previous permit or previous tier does not mean that it's automatically like precedent for what's best practice doing into the future. It just means that it was passed through in the past. So I just want to call that out, that we're having these same conversations over and over because it's really difficult to prove things. We don't have a way to make up for bat losses. At the end of the day, we're having a hard time making up for bat losses or proving that we're making up for bat losses. So yeah, we could go on for another 5 hours with both sides saying this is hard and here's why we can't do this. But Karen, I just want to ask, is there any follow-up that you want to make as far as advances in techniques and any fine point you want to put on number 5 into the future?
I mean, I guess I would say that I do think it's a it's a nearly it's I think it's, yeah, it's almost impossible. It's not almost impossible. It's really difficult to find a bat roosting in a tree. And if we're talking about mitigation over these larger, like, I think we have to remember that Opepid don't only roost in mango and lychee, right? Like they roost in the native species. And so that whole mitigation, like the native species area, right, that's also potentially roosting habitat. And I think feasibility wise, there's just not there's not a way to be checking all of those with the technology we have, to be checking all those trees for roosting bats. I mean, yeah, it's just, I think there's, in various discussions, I know that some of the stuff that HECO's been doing with the finding roosts in certain trees, I think that that's maybe being extrapolated a bit too far to areas where we don't already know that bats are roosting in terms of the ability to find bats in trees.
And Karen, just from your background, just to put a fine point on it. So the fact that it's, they're essentially saying, like, we don't want to be held to detecting even one bat over 11 years at this site as a way of showing that we're actually, bats are actually using these as roost trees, all this credit we're getting for outplanting trees. Like detecting one bat in 11 years you're saying it's that unlikely that it shouldn't be required as a criteria?
Well, I think I guess it gets to these other criteria. I think that the other criteria need to be robust in terms of how they're able to document increase in foraging opportunities and other pieces, because it is so difficult to document roosting. So yeah. And that, I think that goes back to my concern with that we're talking about 511 acres. We're only the portion that's getting restored or improved that would improve probably foraging habitat is quite a bit smaller than that 511 acres. And the idea of, these sort of single outplantings throughout the area being sort of credited equally, when we don't expect that we'd be able to, do much to document their success is problematic.
Karen, question real quick, Jason. Yeah, looking at the preliminary results from Hawaiian Electric, I mean, they're monitoring 17 roofs at this point.
No,
And
I don't have the same data you do. I think some of the ways that I've heard that discussed a bit is I think some of those are maternity roofs, right? So you're talking about 3 bats in one location, which are yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you would know a lot better than I would if there's 17 different roosts in there, but also that's a no. They are searching known roost trees, right?
Right.
And so that's a very different scenario than trying to like every, like like thermal imaging and other things, right? Only work at, in very like limited time window when the bats are still at the trees, right? Because it still has to be cool. So, it's like pretty early morning work. And so it's like the idea of being able to scan whole areas where you don't know if there's a bat there is very different than what's happening with some of that other work. And so I think that's important context.
Okay. I want to just see if there's any public comments out there really quick so we can have that chance and check that off our list real quick.
None
and-
on email or YouTube.
Okay, and can you bring up our recommendation slide so folks can start looking at this now?
Does anyone from the public want to testify on Zoom?
Nothing. Okay.
Um, I think for the so for the success criteria, in number 3, it's not defined what foraging duration is. I didn't see that anywhere in the document, and that needs to be defined somewhere and explained how that's being calculated.
Okay, we can add that definition. Troy, you might be able to speak to this more, but I think it's like bat minutes over the course of a night.
It is,
So a
yeah,
minute with a bat,
and you're
with a
right,
bat
Karen, it's
collar.
not in there. We can add that. Yeah, sorry about that.
And yeah, I think there's I think the way some of the insect sampling is done, it's this kind of tricky, like with that number, the number 1, right? None of the success criteria are with how the insects are being monitored in relation to how the bat activity rates are being calculated as yeah, it deserves some discussion that we don't have time for.
You mean in terms of the years when the data's
Well,
collected?
that
or
like how many weeks are being sampled, which months of the year are being sampled, and
So-
so in terms of like looking at
Yeah,
Sorry,
thanks.
what?
And for the group's benefit, we originally, I think in an earlier iteration, had just one sampling period, 1 or 2 sampling periods during the year for longer time. And then through discussions with USGS, they recommended spreading out the sampling throughout the year. So I think if there's, more specific timing related to that, Karen, I mean, I think the level of, whatever, like how we spread the level of effort and how that maps onto bat activity periods. I mean, Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're willing to adapt accordingly. So we can discuss that.
We're going to add one thing. It's already in this ESRC recommendations, but just refresh my memory if you can, Troy or Julia, like you have other mitigation sites that are close that possibly have mature trees there that bats are possibly using. And do we think that there's no way to actually catch a bat, put a backpack on it or a small transmitter, and see if it's transitioning the new area? Like once we have some trees there that they can roost in, like, the radio telemetry is it possible to show that they would be using this new area? in any, in the future? Is that something that can happen? So we can have that documentation.
I think it would be pretty challenging to catch the right bat that is making that transition. I mean, I think from looking at the H.T. Harvey study, they were capturing bats by Haleakala National Park and on the sort of the other side of East Maui, and those bats had very different locations that they used. Each bat had a very different location that it used for foraging, some of which came over to the Kula side and came over to this area. But in terms of being able to capture the bat or few bats that are, like it would be more of a research study. It would require capturing many more bats and doing that concerted tracking effort, similar to what those research studies involved.
Yeah, Jason, I think what you're describing here is essentially triangulation telemetry, where you're trying to pinpoint the location of the bat on wing. That is really challenging to do, and you get maybe a handful of locations a night. If GPS were available, for instance, it would be much easier to do something like that, but that technology is just not available to us yet.
Okay, so only radio.
Just to clarify, I think Jason's talking about tracking to day roosts, so different than nighttime tracking. Yeah.
Yeah. But so right now, there's no satellite telemetry options available for bat to track a bat. Is that what I just heard? There's only radio telemetry available. I should know this, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I hope something will be on market soon. But yeah, my understanding is that to stay within I want to say it's a 5% body weight threshold. There's nothing on the market quite yet.
Okay. So the only other way would be looking at activity and then using thermal imagery to pinpoint something and then go there with people and watch, basically. Okay.
Jason, there can be technology that essentially it's kind of like VHF. Evan Paxton did the work, right? Of like the radio towers that essentially you're taking advantage of. Instead of having to have a VHF receiver out there handheld, you have a tower that records, it pings every time they pass by or whatever. So those can handle much lighter. You can put a much lighter transmitter on a bird for that, or a bat, sorry, in this case, compared to GPS technology. But yeah, it's a different kind of investment.
And they did try to do that as part of the Waiahu mitigation study. USGS tried to do that in this area as part of the Waiahu mitigation study, and ran into, with the system that they were using, a lot of challenges with interference and those types of pieces. And so they ended up modifying that study design to do more capture and more insect work instead of that radio telemetry or that tower-based telemetry work in this area.
Okay. Well, we have a few more minutes to look over this recommendation slide. If there's anything that folks would like to add to this, speak up now. We might have to meet again. It's, we really just, we want the ESRC comments for this because we want this plan to be built in a way that, we are seeing the metrics that we want to see at the end. We want to see that the habitat's being used in the end. And I think as we go forward, there's a lot of different mitigation projects going on right now. They're doing a few other ones that are ongoing. And I think all of these things are going to eventually show us some more information to be able to understand bat using, the landscape. And so, I think we're continuing to work to that point to be able to gain a better understanding. We're just not there yet. And so I think we're asking the right questions to try to get there. But ESRC committee members, if there's any.
Yeah, so I got something, Jason. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the fruit trees increasing rat populations, i.e. predator populations within the mitigation area. So might recommend that those fruit trees be in the individual 1 tree per acre area, maybe switch out for a known native tree, which I believe Nene Leao is a known tree, and I've seen that growing well as a solitary tree in other ranch lands like on Waimea and Hawaii Island, I believe. So that I might make that recommendation. Thank you.
Melissa?
Yeah, I think I would just really encourage the ACP office to have a robust conversation around how do you determine the area used for mitigation? Again, going back to the 2023 minutes, there was a super robust discussion around whether the 20-acre criteria was the best. If we're going with that here, then we need to make sure that that 20 acres is like, are they actually providing improvements over the entire area that's being credited to them? And how do we determine that area determination? So in this case, you said that barbed wire is removal is minimization, not mitigation, but essentially it's being used as the boundary over which the area calculation is calculated. So I just would encourage the HCP office to have a really robust discussion about what counts as the bats per area, how do we determine the area, and what counts as mitigation within that area to actually credit it as the area.
Thank you, Melissa. And just to clarify, Kavika, is it consider native trees for replacement of all of the fruit trees planted? Is that your recommendation?
Yes. I don't think it's a good idea to increase predator populations within the mitigation area.
Yeah, I agree that outplanting of fruit trees should not be counted as mitigation.
And I guess I would ask, I put at the bottom potential site visit to the mitigation site, and that would be something I need to check in with Auwahi, but just want to put it out there. Is that something that ESRC would feel would be supportive, or just having another additional meeting?
I'd like to get out there if possible.
Thank you, Kavika. Anyone else?
I have one final question on this, which is it said that the wording was a little bit confusing to me on the easement is for the next 10 years, but the trees reach maturity around 5 to 10 years. So around the time that the trees are reaching maturity and providing habitat, does the protection for that area actually extend out into the future? I was just a little bit confused on that point.
Yep. So that entire acreage with Ulapalakua is under an agricultural conservation easement, and so it will continue to be used in agricultural ways in perpetuity. And then as part of our mitigation, which is associated with our permit term, we'll be negotiating additional MOA that adds more specific details around the bat protection. So making sure that any tree clearing is occurring outside of the pupping season, and those types of pieces that will focus more on the bat habitat or the bat protection side of it. But the entire acreage is under agriculture conservation easement for the goals of agriculture and conservation in perpetuity.
Okay, so just keeping an eye on the goal here. Removing trees during the pupping season is against state law, to my understanding. So that's supposed to happen no matter what. Like you're not supposed to remove trees during the pupping season. So that's not something new, right? And secondly, agricultural protection does not equal benefits to bats in making up for them. So again, I think my question stands as far as agricultural purpose could include harvesting lumber or other things that could essentially undo the benefit for the bats into the future. And so agricultural easement designation doesn't help the bats in any, specifically in the case of the outplanting the native trees and ensuring that those are there in perpetuity for the bats.
No, I don't think it's illegal to cut trees during pupping season.
Okay.
If you get federal money, you're not allowed to cut trees using federal money during pupping season.
Well,
But
you can cut trees anytime you want. It's just that if you kill a bat, then you're in trouble. So it just don't cut the
Got it.
trees
Thanks
down
for the
during pupping
clarification.
season. So really that's where
Got
that.
it. Okay. But the
Um,
agricultural designation thing, I think doesn't ensure that those outplanted trees stay there into the future, and certainly not past the point where they're actually providing a benefit to the bats.
Yeah, I think we've been in conversations with Ulapalakua Ranch, and I think in using that relationship with them and moving forward on this, a lot of the pieces are kind of tied to when our permitting terms are associated out there. The ranch does have these longer term conservation goals and goals of continuing to use this land in a similar way. And so these are the agreements that we're able to put in place with them and using this private land in this way. And I think it's one of the recommendations we've heard from ESRC in the past is to try and coordinate with private landowners in these opportunities. And that's one of the sort of sticking points in terms of trying to do that long perpetual when our conservation commitment, when our mitigation commitments have that time frame on them.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Julia. So essentially what I hear you saying is that you guys are doing everything within your power on that. And so it really becomes an HCP office question as far as what can we do to ensure that the benefits remain beyond the period of the permit? Because again, really highlighting the point that the benefits aren't showing up until around the point that the permit closes, as far as breaching maturity to a point where they would provide good roosting habitat for pupping individuals and that kind of a thing. And so it's an HCP office question. How can they ensure that these outplanted trees are maintained into the future beyond the permit period to provide that net benefit for the species?
yeah, did it say sorry, Jason, oh my, didn't it say somewhere in the plan that the ranch would then take over monitoring of plants planted and trees planted? After your guys' term is over? I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is Jason. I don't believe that's the case. It would be in the ranch's vested interest, and to our best understanding is their intention to keep the trees, in perpetuity, but we are unable to commit to that in any sort of contractual way. But I did want to circle back to the last bullet point about a site visit. Our hope is to get this finished up before we enter into the tier 6 mitigation. I know we have a conversation next week and we can get into that timeline and what that sort of looks like. I do want to also acknowledge that we're at noon here, and I believe one of you needs to jump. But I just wanted to quickly address that. Our hope is, I think, looking at these recommendations, there's a lot in here that we can take and quickly address in the plan. And that's our intention to do so. We'll do that pretty quickly and get that back in front of DOFA, so that, our priority really is to get this finished before we enter tier 6. We know that was a huge concern in tier 5, and we have really made that a priority and worked very quickly and expediently to try to make that happen. And so I just wanted to take one more last opportunity to thank everyone on the call for their input and guidance in making this happen and putting together what I think is a really solid plan.
yeah, just to be clear, I don't need to have a site visit before we finalize this. I would just love to get there one day and see it all. I've never been there.
We would love to host you, Kavika. It would be great to have you come out and see the trees that we've got going out there. And as I highlighted, George has been working with a PEP team. So there's some really cool spots up in some of our tier 1 mitigation areas and tier 4 mitigation areas.
Yeah, and I was the one that was supposed to leave at 12. I can stay a tiny bit longer, but I really do need to get to a lunch. I'm curious if you folks can continue the discussion since we don't have any voting items. I think it's okay for me to leave and you folks to continue, but maybe Danica can
I
advise.
agree. Just anything after this won't be official ESRC recommendations.
Okay, well, I'm good with what's there now.
We can give another 15 minutes.
I also
15.
don't have anything further, but I can stay on a little bit. I have a 1 o'clock and I need to eat before then, so.
Okay, well, if folks that have, for what we have on the recommendation side, Kavika, you're okay with it right now? Can I get hands from other folks that are okay with this? And if we have to, thank you, Kavika. If we have to come back and revisit this, we'd like to push what, we'll work with the applicant and see if we can massage some of these things, get questions answered, and then we can come back to you guys and kind of show you what the outcome of that is. And then we can decide if we need to reschedule another meeting and have some more conversation.
Thank you, Jason. Just from a procedural understanding, I know you said some things at the beginning that I was a little bit confused by as far as, can you clarify how our recommendations today are being used? And we're not like voting on a tier 6 at any point as a committee, is that correct?
Yes,
You're just
this is going to
working
be
with-
an agency-driven action with the applicant. We just wanted to make sure that you guys had an opportunity to review this plan and provide your recommendations. And we can work with the applicant on those things. In the future, you know, we can devise HCPs to have these implementation plans ready to go in the HCPs. So when we're reviewing the HCPs, we're seeing all these implementation plans and we can just go down that road. In this case, that's not what's happening. And so anything that came after the approval of the HCP, it's been DOFAW working with the applicant to approve these SSMIPs or implementation plans. So we just really wanted to get it in front of you guys so you can comment on them.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate it. I just want to be clear on how our recommendations are going to be used. And we've noted in other spaces that the time commitment for ESRC is ballooned because you guys are doing such a great job of following up, which I really appreciate. But we do have day jobs. We're not paid by the hour for the additional time spent here. It takes away from other duties. And so if all you need is our input and then you're going to take it or leave it as you wish, then it is what it is. I think we've said our pieces. So
Yeah,
I don't know how the other committee members feel.
With that, Melissa, you know, in the future, and we'll probably have this on one of the next agendas, is to set up a permitted interaction group where we can have different members of the committee work on certain topics, whether it's predator control, whatever it may be. So we can really come to these meetings and have like all the information we kind of need about a certain subject from that subject matter expert, just provide a little report out. So we'll talk to you guys about, they're called PIGs, permitted interaction groups. I'm sure you've heard of it. So we'll talk about these in the future, and this may help us speed up our decision-making processes and discussions that we're having in these meetings. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Because yeah, if we're having to have the same discussion 3 years later now, because that was a 2023 tier 5 discussion, and if essentially we have the same discussion again, it's not a great use of everybody's time. So I really appreciate that. That sounds like a great idea.
All right. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and we have recommendations here.
Karen has her hand up.
Karen, sorry.
So there's not anything on that slide about adding the definition of foraging duration, or foraging duration. Like what that is.
Yep.
Is for the good nature, the rat trapping near the water feature. So I think that's something I don't know that I.
Yeah, you don't need to have that out there. I was more concerned about how to control predators in the mitigation area when they're planting fruit trees, it'll attract predators. But if they're not gonna plant fruit trees, then I'm okay with not having it, but I would think it's in their best interest to have good natures in the areas where they're trying to have roosting bats. That's something to consider.
So, I mean, consider predator control and in areas of potential roosting. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would generally be from a net benefit perspective. It would also help with the generation of the forest, generally speaking, right? So you're gonna have higher success. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I have additional questions and things that I guess maybe the process be that we can just submit, maybe I could submit some additional questions to DOFA, or how would that go given where we're at with time?
I think that's fine. If you guys want to submit comments to us internally via email or whatnot, and we can work with the applicant. You know, we're not making decisions here or anything. Yeah. So that,
Yeah, I think it just, there's pieces related to the insect sampling and the some of the acoustics that just be nice to be able to have some back and forth on, because I do think the applicant's interested in improving this, and so it'd be nice to be able to have some back and forth on that.
and multiple times, and I picked out things in there that I had questions about, but I really appreciate you guys being here with us, because I mean, over time, we're going to be able to filter a lot of these things in future plans where we're not talking about them again. And yeah, I'm still learning myself, and it's really, I just love to see like a lot of your guys' comments, because it just makes us better at helping the applicants in the future. So I really thank you for that. Okay. Any other comments on the recommendation side? If not, we can kind of just move forward into our next item, which is adjournment. Everyone okay? Anything else to add? Otherwise, we'll stand by for emails from folks, if that's okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Let me just get everybody motion, second, third. Okay, unanimous.
And thank you to Auwahi and Vinergy and the ESRC as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
very much.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
13
See you next
adjournment.
week.
Thank you, guys.